Victor Blackwell slammed the deed on the counter so hard the clerk's coffee cup rattled off the edge and shattered on the floor. "Sign it," he said. Not asked, said. The widow across the table, 62 years old, hands still rough from 30 years of working cattle alongside her late husband, looked at the paper and then looked at the man who'd placed it there. Her lip trembled. Not from weakness. From fury she had nowhere to put. "That land belonged to my husband's father," she said. "And now," Blackwell said, straightening his coat, "it belongs to the future." Nobody stopped him. Nobody even stood up. If a man with enough money and enough lawyers tells you that the ground beneath your feet isn't yours anymore, what do you do? What would you do? If this story makes you feel something, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment with the city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The morning the stagecoach was due in Red Bluff, Silas Granger did not go into town. He told himself it was because the north fence line needed mending. There were 3 posts leaning at bad angles after last week's wind, and if he didn't reset them before the ground softened further, he'd be chasing cattle into the Hendersons' pasture by the end of the week. That was the reason he told himself. He repeated it while he loaded the post-hole digger onto the wagon. He repeated it again while he hitched the mare. He believed it, more or less, until he caught himself standing at the edge of the porch for the 4th time in an hour, staring down the road toward town, and realized the post-hole digger was still sitting in the back of the wagon exactly where he'd put it 40 minutes ago. He hadn't moved. He set his jaw, climbed down from the porch, and actually drove to the fence line. He dug 2 post holes before he gave up pretending. The truth he hadn't said out loud to anyone, not even to his foreman Roy, who had been with him long enough to notice everything and was wise enough to say nothing, was that Silas Granger was scared. Not of the woman. He didn't even know the woman. He was scared of the idea of her, of what it meant that she was coming, of what it meant that he had written that letter in the first place, on a cold February night 4 months ago, after he sat down at the kitchen table to eat supper alone and realized with sudden, quiet horror that he could not remember the last time he had spoken a full sentence to another human being. That was the night he wrote the letter. He hadn't told Roy about it. He hadn't told his neighbor Hank Dubois about it. He had folded the letter, walked to the post office himself before sunrise, handed it to Margaret behind the counter without meeting her eyes, and then spent 2 weeks convincing himself it would probably come to nothing. It didn't come to nothing. Her reply arrived on a Thursday. Evelyn Mercer, from St. Louis, originally. More recently, from wherever the work took her, she mentioned briefly that she had spent 2 years helping her father run a traveling medical practice through 4 different states, which Silas read once, set down, and did not think about again because it raised questions he wasn't ready to ask. She wrote plainly. No excessive flattery, no desperate reassurances. She asked him 2 practical questions: what the winters were like, and whether the nearest town had a doctor. He answered both honestly. She wrote back within the week and said she would come. That was it. No drama. No lengthy negotiation. He almost wished there had been. Because now she was arriving, and Silas was standing at a fence line that didn't actually need fixing yet, digging holes in half-frozen Montana dirt, and he could admit this to himself at least, completely unprepared for whatever came next. He drove back to the ranch at noon. Roy was patching a section of barn roof and climbed down when he heard the wagon. "Stage comes in at 2, Roy said. He wasn't looking at Silas directly. He was cleaning dirt off his hands with a rag, which was what Roy did when he was trying not to smirk. "I know when the stage comes in," Silas said. "You planning to be there?" "I own the ranch. I arranged this. Of course I'm going to be there." Roy nodded slowly. "You might want to change your shirt." Silas looked down at his shirt. There was a long streak of dark mud across the left shoulder from the post-hole work, and now that he was looking at it, he noticed his boots were also in questionable condition. He changed his shirt. He did not comment on having changed his shirt. He drove into Red Bluff at 1:15, which was early enough that the stage hadn't arrived yet, but late enough that half the town was already gathered near the general store because word had gotten out, as it always did in a town with 400 people and nothing much happening on a Tuesday, that Silas Granger's mail-order bride was coming in on the afternoon coach. He had not anticipated an audience. Margaret from the post office was there. The Halverson brothers, who ran the feed store, were leaning against a post. Old Pete, who had not had a reason to leave his porch in 3 weeks, had somehow made it to town and was now sitting on an overturned crate with the expression of a man at a theater. Hank Dubois and his wife Clara were there too, and Clara caught Silas's eye and gave him a smile that was genuinely kind, which somehow made it worse. "You didn't tell me the whole county was coming," Silas said quietly to Hank. Hank shrugged. "We don't get much news out here." "I'm not news." "You rode away for a wife, Silas. In Red Bluff, that's practically a parade." Silas stood apart from the group. He held his hat in both hands and watched the road, and he became aware, somewhere in the back of his chest, of something he hadn't felt in 4 years and almost didn't recognize at first. Hope was too big a word for it. It was smaller than that, more fragile. The feeling you get when you've been in a dark room a long time and someone opens a door 2 rooms away and you can't see anything yet, but the quality of the air changes very slightly, and you think, maybe. He told himself to stop it. The stage rolled in at 8 minutes past 2, which was practically on time by Montana standards, and the wheels hadn't fully stopped before the crowd shifted forward with the collective curiosity of people who had already decided this was the most interesting thing happening this week. The door swung open. The first person out was a heavy-set man in a traveling coat who turned out to be a hardware salesman heading further north. The second was a young couple who clearly belonged together. The third, she stepped down without waiting for assistance. That was the first thing Silas noticed. Not her face, not her dress, not anything he could have described to someone later. What he noticed was that she picked up her own suitcase, a single medium-sized bag, not the trunk he'd half expected, and stepped down from the coach with the ease of someone who had done this before and did not require a hand offered. She straightened up, took one brief look at the small crowd that had assembled entirely for her benefit, and did not flinch. She just looked at them, calm as a woman reading a menu. Then she looked at Silas. He had no idea how she knew which one he was. He was standing further back than most of the crowd, hat in his hands, probably wearing the expression of a man standing in front of a judge. But somehow she looked directly at him, and she held his gaze for a moment, and then she walked toward him through the crowd, which parted without quite knowing why. She stopped about 3 feet in front of him. "Mr. Granger," she said. "Miss Mercer," he said. A pause. Somewhere behind him, someone coughed. He was pretty sure it was Roy, who had apparently followed him into town without mentioning he intended to do so. "Thank you for coming to meet me," she said. "It's your arrival," he said. It seemed right. Another pause. She looked at him steadily. She had dark eyes, observant eyes, the kind that don't miss things. And her expression was composed in a way that told him almost nothing about what she was thinking, which unsettled him more than he expected. Most women he'd encountered in his life, his late wife included, rest her, were readable. Not easy, but readable. This woman looked at him the way a careful person looks at something they're still deciding whether to trust. He realized he was still holding his hat in both hands like an apology. He put it back on his head. "I thought," he said, "we might go to the diner before I take you out to the ranch. Give you a chance to settle yourself. After the journey." "I've been sitting for 2 days," she said. "I'd rather see the ranch first if that's all right with you." It was not what he expected her to say. Behind him, very quietly, old Pete said, in the way old men do when something confirms what they already suspected about the world. "It's a fair distance," Silas said. "I didn't come to Montana to stay near the stage stop," she said, and there was no sharpness to it, no challenge. She said it the way you say something that seems obvious to you, without being unkind about the fact that it may not have been obvious to someone else. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up her suitcase. She let him take it, which he noted, though she didn't make a point of it, and he led her to the wagon. Roy fell into step about 10 paces behind them, saying nothing, which was Roy's way of being present without being intrusive. The ride to the ranch took 40 minutes on a good road. This was not entirely a good road. Silas had made this drive so many times he no longer noticed the ruts, the places where the spring mud had hardened into ridges that made the wagon shudder, the 2 creek crossings that required slowing to a near stop. He found himself halfway through noticing all of it again, seeing it through the eyes of someone who hadn't grown numb to it. She didn't complain. She didn't make small talk either, not the nervous, filling kind. She asked him one question about 20 minutes in. "The letter you sent," she said. You said the last foreman left in December. Roy's been with me 3 years, he said. He's not leaving. The man who left before Roy, that was December of last year. Why did he leave? Silas considered the honest answer, which was complicated, and the simple answer, which was also honest but left things out. The work was harder than he expected, he said finally. And the winters are long. Some people can't find their way through the winter out here. She nodded, as if that told her something. And you? She said. Do you find your way through the winters? The question surprised him. Not because it was rude, it wasn't, but because it was direct in a way he wasn't accustomed to. People in Red Bluff didn't ask Silas Granger personal questions. They hadn't for years. They treated him with a careful distance that he had accepted without ever deciding whether he wanted it. I get through them, he said. She turned and looked at him directly for the first time since the stage stop. That's not the same thing, she said. He didn't answer. She turned back to look at the road ahead, and he drove the rest of the way in silence. That was not entirely comfortable, but was not entirely uncomfortable either. It was the silence of two people who have just discovered the conversation they're in is slightly different from the one they thought they were having. The ranch came into view around the bend where the cottonwoods started. Silas always felt something when he saw it from this angle. Pride was part of it. Grief was part of it. The strange, compressed feeling of knowing that every board of that house and every post of those fences had been built in a life he used to have. The house had been his wife Margaret's idea, the wraparound porch especially. He hadn't changed much of it. He didn't know if that was out of respect for her memory or simple inability to imagine changing it. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, looking at it. Then she said, "The third fence post from the gate is leaning." He looked. She was right. "I know," he said. "The barn door doesn't close all the way," she added, not accusatory, just observational, as if she were reading a list aloud. "And that window on the second floor, the one on the left, the glass is cracked." "Also aware," he said. "But the structure is sound," she said. "The foundation, the main walls. Someone built this to last." Something in his chest shifted slightly, unexpectedly. "My father-in-law," he said. "He built the original structure. I added the east wing." "It's a good ranch," she said simply. She climbed down before he could help her, which he was beginning to suspect was going to be a recurring pattern, and she picked up her own suitcase, and she walked toward the porch, and she stopped at the steps and turned back to look at him. "Mr. Granger," she said, "I want to be honest with you about something." Here it was. He had known something like this was coming. He set the brake on the wagon and climbed down. "All right," he said. "I came out here because your letter was the only one I received that didn't promise me a life without difficulty," she said. "Every other letter I received promised me ease or comfort or happiness. Yours said, and I'm quoting approximately, 'The work is hard and the winters are harder, and I cannot promise anything except that I need someone practical and the ranch needs attention.'" He remembered writing that. He had almost rewritten it 3 times. He sent it as is in the end because he was tired of performing and didn't have the energy to pretend to be more appealing than he was. "I remember," he said. "That's why I wrote back," she said. "I want you to know that. Not because I had no options. Because that letter was honest, and honest is rarer than people admit." He stood there for a moment, holding his hat again without meaning to. "The room I prepared," he started. "Is it upstairs?" "Yes." "Then I'll see it in a moment," she said. "First, show me the kitchen." He showed her the kitchen. She opened every cabinet. She checked the stores, lifted lids, looked at the state of the stove with the focus of a general reviewing a new command. She didn't say anything critical, but she didn't say anything false either. What she said, when she had finished looking around, was, "You've been feeding yourself on function and not much else." "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted. "That's not actually a permanent condition," she said, and there was the first flicker of something that might have been dry humor, there and gone so fast he almost missed it. She asked to see the rest of the house. He showed her. She was quiet in the parlor, and he didn't offer any explanation for the photograph on the mantel, and she didn't ask for one. She simply looked at it for a moment with an expression that was careful and kind without being pitying. In the upstairs room he'd prepared for her, she set her suitcase down and looked out the window at the yard below. "The fence needs fixing," she said. "Tomorrow," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not rushing you. I'm just getting a picture." He stood in the doorway, not certain whether to stay or go. "Miss Mercer," he said. "You can call me Evelyn," she said, still looking out the window. "We're going to be sharing a kitchen. Miss Mercer is a long way around." "Evelyn," he said, "I want you to know, I don't expect—" He stopped, restarted. "This arrangement, I understand it's unconventional, and I don't expect you to be—" He stopped again. She turned from the window and looked at him. "I don't expect you to be something you're not either," she said. "That's the thing about an honest letter. It sets a fair expectation." He nodded. "Get some rest," he said, and he meant it practically, but it came out sounding almost like something else, like a quiet acknowledgement of something. He wasn't sure what. That the journey had been long. That they were both, in different ways, tired. He pulled the door closed behind him and went back downstairs. Roy was in the kitchen when he got there, pouring himself coffee without asking permission, which was his right after 3 years. "Well," Roy said. "Well, what?" Silas said. "Is she what you expected?" Silas thought about it. "No," he said. Roy waited. "She's not what I expected at all," Silas said. Roy poured a second cup and set it in front of him without comment. They sat at the kitchen table, the two of them, in the late afternoon quiet that had been the only kind of quiet in this house for almost 4 years now, and Silas drank his coffee and thought about the way she'd said that's not the same thing when he told her he got through the winters. Upstairs, he heard the floor creak once, softly, the sound of someone moving in a room that hadn't been occupied since a grief he still couldn't fully name. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and stared at the table. Something, he didn't have a word for it yet, had changed in the house. He couldn't explain it. He wasn't sure he wanted to. He only knew that the silence right now felt different from the silence this morning, and the difference was not nothing. It was not nothing at all. The floor in the hallway outside the kitchen creaked at 5:15 in the morning. Silas knew the exact time because he was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee he hadn't bothered to reheat, staring at a ledger he hadn't actually been reading. He'd been sitting there since 4, which was not unusual. Sleep had been a negotiation for years. Sometimes it came, sometimes it didn't, and he'd stopped fighting the nights it didn't. He just sat in the kitchen and waited for morning to arrive. He heard the creak, then footsteps, careful and soft, moving down the stairs. He had a half-second impulse to pretend he wasn't there, to turn the lamp down, sit very still, which was ridiculous, and he knew it was ridiculous, so he stayed exactly where he was and waited. Evelyn appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a plain working dress, her hair pulled back but not yet fully pinned, carrying her boots in one hand rather than wearing them so she wouldn't wake anyone. She stopped when she saw him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "I didn't think you'd be up," she said. "I'm usually up early," he said. "How early?" 4, sometimes 3:30. She looked at him in the dim lamplight with that same measuring expression she'd used at the stage stop, the one that felt like being assessed for a purpose she hadn't disclosed yet. Then she walked to the stove, touched it to see if it was warm, and without asking permission, began building the fire back up. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said, and kept doing it. He watched her move around the kitchen with a kind of functional efficiency that had nothing performed about it. She wasn't trying to impress him at 5 in the morning. She was simply cold and hungry, and the stove needed to be lit. He found that easier to be around than he'd expected. "Coffee?" she said. "That one's cold," he said, gesturing at his cup. "I can tell," she said. "I meant fresh." She put the coffee on. She found the bread from yesterday and cut 2 slices without asking if he wanted any, set one in front of him and kept the other for herself. And then she sat down at the other end of the table. Not beside him, not directly across, but at the corner, which was a small thing and probably unconscious, but which meant they could talk without staring directly at each other, which Silas found he appreciated. "You couldn't sleep either?" he said. "I slept fine," she said. "I just wake early. My father started his rounds at first light, and I got used to being up before the sun." She paused. He was a physician, traveling practice. I mentioned it in my letter." "You helped him," Silas said. "That's what you said." "Helped is a modest way to put it," she said, without vanity. "By the time I was 16, I was stitching wounds while he set bones, because there was only one of him, and sometimes two injuries at once. By the time I was 20, I could diagnose most common conditions on my own. By the time he died, she stopped, just briefly. I was his practice, essentially. He signed the papers and I did most of the work. Silas looked at her. She was spreading a thin layer of butter across her bread with the concentration of someone keeping their voice steady. "How long ago did he die?" he said. 3 years, she said. "Just over." She looked up and caught him looking at her, and for a second something passed between them. Not tenderness exactly, nothing that dramatic. Just the quiet, involuntary recognition of two people who both know what a specific kind of loss feels like, and have both gotten reasonably good at not making it the first thing they talk about. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," she said. "Same to you." I saw the photograph in the parlor. He nodded. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, the new pot, which she'd poured for him without announcing it, and that was the end of that particular conversation. They'd opened the door, looked at what was on the other side, and by unspoken agreement decided that was enough for 5:15 in the morning. She asked him about the cattle operation instead. Practical questions, specific ones. How many head, what breed, what condition they were wintering in, what his losses had been last season. He answered her, and she listened in the way people listen when they're actually building a picture and not just waiting for their turn to speak. When he mentioned the losses, 7 head to a rough patch in January, 2 more in February, she asked what the symptoms had been before he lost them. "Slow first," he said, "then fast. They'd go off feed, get lethargic, and then within a week they were gone." "What were you feeding them through January?" "Same as always. Hay, some grain supplement." "Where'd the hay come from?" He told her. She asked him 2 more questions about the storage conditions and the supplier, and then she got quiet and looked at her bread. "What?" he said. "Possibly nothing," she said. "But that supplier, did any of the Halverson brothers mention problems with their herd last winter?" He thought about it. Tom Halverson had said something in February, something Silas had half listened to because he'd been dealing with his own losses. "Hank said Tom lost 4, he said slowly. "Did Tom buy from the same supplier?" Silas stared at her. "I don't know," he said. "It might be worth asking," she said, and went back to her bread, and that was the end of that too, delivered without any emphasis, just a woman eating breakfast and filing information in the correct order. He thought, who is this person? He didn't say it. He drank his coffee. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten from black to the deep, particular gray that came just before color returned to the world, and Silas Granger sat in his kitchen with a woman he'd known for less than 20 hours and felt, against every instinct he'd developed over 4 years of deliberate isolation, something that might generously be described as interest. Not romantic interest. I wasn't going to catastrophize it into that. Simply interest. The ordinary kind. The kind that makes you want to know what a person thinks about the next thing and the thing after that. He hadn't felt that in a while. He stood up and put his cup in the basin and said, "I'm going to do the morning feed. You don't have to." "I'll come," she said. "It's cold." "I have a coat." He looked at her for a moment. Then he handed her the extra work gloves from the hook by the door, his spare pair too large for her hands, and didn't say anything about it, and she put them on without comment, and they went out together into the gray Montana morning. The cattle were in the south pasture, 16 head that had come through the worst of winter in reasonable condition, and Evelyn walked the fence line with him in a way that was not the walk of someone touring a ranch. She stopped at each animal, watched it for a moment, checked eyes and posture with the quiet focus of someone taking inventory. She didn't touch them unnecessarily or make noise. She just looked and moved on and looked again. At the far end of the pasture, she stopped and stood still. "This one," she said. He came to stand beside her. The steer she was looking at was eating, moving normally, showing nothing obvious. "What about it?" "Watch the way it's carrying its left shoulder," she said. "Just for a minute." He watched, and then he saw it. A barely perceptible stiffness, a slight reluctance to shift weight to the left front quarter, so subtle he would have walked right past it. "Could be early joint trouble," she said. "Could be something he got into. Either way, I'd separate him for a few days. Watch him." She looked at Silas. "Do you have a good place to keep one animal separate from the herd?" "Small pen near the barn," he said. "Good," she said, and they walked back and she helped him move the steer without drama and without error, handling herself around the animal with a calm practicality that told him she'd been around livestock before, which she had not mentioned in any letter. Back at the barn, he said, "You didn't tell me you knew cattle." "You didn't ask," she said. "Your father's practice was rural," she said. "Farming families. You treat the farmer, you learn to know the farm." She pulled off the oversized gloves and held them out to him. "A lot of what I know about animals comes from the same place as what I know about people. You watch how they move. You watch what they avoid. You watch what they're trying not to show you." He took the gloves. There was a pause that lasted a few seconds and felt longer. "Are you watching what I'm trying not to show you?" he said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out before he decided to say it, and he heard it land and couldn't take it back. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but opened slightly, a barely perceptible change in the quality of her attention. "Not yet," she said. "We've only just met." It wasn't a no. He wasn't sure why he noticed that. He put the gloves back on the hook and said they ought to go in for breakfast, and they did. And Roy arrived at 7:30 and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway when he found eggs on the stove and bread sliced and the coffee already made, and Evelyn Mercer standing at the counter reviewing the supply ledger that Silas had left on the table and apparently hadn't looked at in 3 months. Roy looked at Silas. Silas looked back at him with the expression of a man who does not want commentary. Roy sat down and helped himself to coffee without being offered any. "I'm Roy," he said to Evelyn. "I know," she said, still looking at the ledger. "Silas mentioned you. You've been here 3 years." "Almost 4, Roy said. "You order the feed supplies?" "He does," Roy said, meaning Silas. "From the same supplier in both years?" Roy looked at Silas again. "Most of it," Silas said. "Why?" "I want to look at what you ordered in November and December," she said. "The lot numbers, if you have them." "I might have the receipts," Roy said slowly. "Why?" She told them her theory about the hay supply. She laid it out simply, without overstating it, in the same tone you'd use to describe a weather pattern. Not alarming, just factual. When she finished, Roy sat quietly for a moment. "Tom Halverson lost 4 head in January," Roy said. "I know," said Evelyn. "Did he use the same supplier?" Roy and Silas looked at each other. "We could ask him," Roy said. "Today would be a good time," she said, and she turned back to the ledger. Roy looked at Silas one more time, and this time his expression was not the smirking, amused face from yesterday afternoon. It was something more careful than that. Something that said, "I see what you've got here, and I think you may not entirely realize it yet." Silas picked up his hat and said he'd ride over to Halverson's after the morning work was done. The morning work took until nearly noon. There were the fence posts that actually did need attention, and a section of the barn roof that Roy had temporarily patched, and which needed a more permanent solution before the spring rains came. Evelyn did not come outside to supervise. She stayed in the house, and when Silas came in at noon, he found the kitchen reorganized. Not drastically, not in a way that made him feel replaced, but in the way that a practical person reorganizes a space that has been maintained by someone doing their best under difficulty. Things moved closer to where they were actually used. A broken handle on the cabinet door, which he had been stepping around for 8 months, had been repaired with a piece of hardware she had apparently found in the storage room. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the repaired cabinet. "The hardware was in a box under the workbench," she said from behind him. She was at the table writing something. "Left over from something, I assume. It was the right size." "You fixed my cabinet," he said. "It was broken," she said. He opened the cabinet. The door swung cleanly. He closed it. He opened it again. 8 months that's been broken," he said, mostly to himself. "Things accumulate when you're managing alone," she said, without any weight to it, just an observation. "There's a window latch upstairs that needs the same treatment. I'll do it tomorrow." He sat down at the table across from her. She was writing in a small notebook, and he could see she'd been making a list. Not a to-do list exactly, more like an inventory. Items, conditions, notes beside each one. The steer with the shoulder issue was on there, the fence posts, the roof, the supply question. Several things he hadn't noticed and several more he'd been ignoring. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been looking," she said. "There's a difference." The ranch needed looking at, he said. He heard the roughness in his own voice and couldn't quite smooth it. I know it does. I've been managing. It's been... He stopped. She set down her pen. Silas, she said, and it was the first time she'd used his name, and it landed differently than he expected, quiet and direct. I'm not criticizing. I'm making a list so we know what we're working with. That's all. He looked at her. I let some things go, he said. After I let some things go. I know, she said. And then you kept everything else running alone for almost 4 years, which is not a small thing. The bones of this ranch are good. The structure is sound. I said that yesterday and I meant it. She picked her pen back up. I'm just looking at the rest. He didn't trust himself to say much after that, so he stood up and said he was going to Halverson's and would be back before dark. Tell him about the shoulder steer too, she said without looking up. Ask if he's seen it in any of his animals. He rode to the Halverson place feeling like a man who has been handed a piece of information he needs time to properly process. He'd expected practical. He'd asked for practical. He'd gotten something more thorough than practical, and something in him wasn't sure whether to be grateful or slightly destabilized by it, because the two feelings were sitting together in his chest in a way that was not entirely comfortable. Tom Halverson had used the same supplier. He confirmed it in under 10 minutes, and then the conversation went in a direction Silas hadn't anticipated, because Tom started talking about his neighbor Gus Pedersen, who had also lost animals last winter. And Gus had mentioned it to Frank Delacroix, who ranched up the north end of the valley, and Frank had also lost head. Did they all use the same feed source? Silas said. Tom leaned on the fence. You know, I never thought to ask. Why? Silas told him what Evelyn had said that morning. He relayed it as accurately as he could, including the part about the lot numbers and the receipts. Tom was quiet for a moment. That's a sharp thought, he said. Where'd that come from? Silas hesitated on the word. Not because he didn't know what to call her, but because whatever word he chose was going to be one of the first times he'd said it out loud. The woman who arrived yesterday, Evelyn. Tom looked at him. The mail-order bride? She's not, he started, and then wasn't sure how to finish that sentence accurately, so he let it trail off. She has medical training. She noticed the steer this morning. Tom was quiet again, in the way of a man rearranging his expectations. Bring her by sometime, Tom said finally. Clara would like to meet her. Actually, Clara would like to interrogate her, but she'd call it meeting. Silas nodded and rode home. The trouble with Victor Blackwell started the very next morning, though Silas didn't know yet that it was Blackwell's doing, and wouldn't know for some time. He found the survey stakes first. Roy found them, actually, at just past 7 in the morning, riding the east fence line as he did most mornings, and he came back to the house with a wooden stake in his hand and an expression that Silas had not seen on Roy's face very often, a careful, controlled version of anger. East boundary, Roy said, about 40 yards inside our fence line. Silas took the stake and looked at it. It had a strip of orange ribbon on the top, the kind surveyors used, and stamped on the wood in black letters was a number and a name. The name was a company Silas didn't recognize. There are 4 more, Roy said. I left them where they were. Silas turned the stake over in his hands. Evelyn came out to the porch, saw their faces, and came down the steps. What is that? She said. Silas handed it to her. She read the company name. She read it again. Something in her expression went very quiet, in a specific way he was already beginning to recognize. Not alarmed, not panicked, but sharply attentive in the manner of someone suddenly paying a different quality of attention. Have you seen this company name before? She said. No, Silas said. Roy? No, Roy said. Do you know if any other ranchers in the valley have found stakes like this? The 2 men looked at each other. Not that I've heard, Silas said. Yet. You need to go talk to your neighbors today, she said. She handed the stake back to him. All of them you can reach. Ask if they found any. We should pull them first, Roy said. Don't, Evelyn said, and her voice was firm in a way it hadn't been before, direct without being sharp. Leave them exactly where they are. Document where they're placed. Draw the positions relative to the fence line. Note the distances. Don't touch them. Roy looked at Silas. She's right, Silas said, though he wasn't yet entirely sure why she was right. He just believed she was. He spent that day riding. He visited 5 ranchers. 2 of them, Gus Pedersen and a man named Aldrich Webb, who ranched the southeast corner of the valley, had also found stakes. Gus had pulled his, which Silas now regretted, but Webb had left his in place because he'd been meaning to ask someone what they meant and hadn't gotten around to it. Silas drew the positions at Webb's place and described them to Evelyn that evening at the kitchen table, and she copied them into her notebook with a precision that was startling. "All inside the fence line?" she said. "Both places," he said. "Gus pulled his, so I don't know the exact position, but he said they were close to the water." Evelyn looked up from her notebook. "The water," she said. "The creek runs across all 3 properties," he said. "The East Branch comes down from the ridge." She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the rough map she'd drawn in her notebook. "Silas," she said, "who owns the water rights in this valley?" He explained how it worked, the old territorial grants, the way water rights had been established, who held formal title to what, and who simply relied on traditional usage that had never been formally challenged. He knew his own rights were solid. His father-in-law had been careful about documentation. Some of the other ranchers were less certain. She listened to every word. "The company on that stake," she said when he finished. "I'd like to find out who owns it." "How would you do that?" Roy said. He'd stayed for dinner, which he was doing more often now, and Silas had stopped pretending to be surprised by it. "County records," she said. "Whoever filed these surveys had to register their company somewhere, and whoever sent these surveyors out had a reason for targeting these 3 properties specifically." She tapped the notebook with her pen. "The creek runs through all of them." She looked at Silas. "Have you heard the name Victor Blackwell?" she said. He had, vaguely. A land speculator, someone had mentioned in passing, at the feed store maybe, or at the diner in town, one of those background conversations that you half hear and don't file away because it doesn't seem to concern you. "Heard of him," Silas said. "Don't know him." "He's been active in the northern part of the territory," she said. "My father treated a family in '89 who'd had a land dispute with a Blackwell company. Different company name than this one. But the family lost the land and I never understood how, because the title seemed clear." She looked at her notebook. "I might be wrong. It might be a coincidence." "But," Silas said. "But the father of that family described something similar," she said. "Stakes appearing, surveys he hadn't authorized, and then legal notices." Roy set down his coffee cup. "Legal notices for what?" Roy said. "Boundary disputes," she said, "filed in county court. The kind that take months and cost money that ranching families don't have." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up, and Silas could hear it working at the corner of the barn roof where the repair hadn't fully held. He made a mental note to get up there tomorrow. "Who told you about Blackwell?" Silas said. "Nobody told me," she said. "I read. When you travel from county to county for 15 years with a physician, you have a great deal of time in the wagon and very little entertainment. I read newspapers, territorial gazettes, land commission bulletins. There were several notices about disputed land claims over the years. Blackwell's name appeared adjacent to more than one of them." She said it flatly, not with drama. Just information she'd stored and was now retrieving because it had become relevant. Roy was looking at her with the expression of a man who had quietly revised an assessment and was not embarrassed to have done so. "I need to go into town," she said. "The county recorder's office. Do they keep records there or at the territorial seat?" "Here for the county," Silas said. "Territorial records are further." "County is enough to start," she said. "I can take you Thursday," Silas said. "I need to pick up wire anyway." She nodded and closed her notebook. That night, Silas sat on the porch for a while after Roy left, the way he sometimes did when he wasn't tired enough for sleep yet and needed the open air to settle his thoughts. The temperature had dropped, and he could see his breath. He was thinking about the stakes. He was thinking about Evelyn's certainty when she said, "Don't pull them," and the way Roy had looked at him, and the way he had said she's right without needing to understand why yet, which was not something Silas Granger did easily or often. He was a man who liked to understand the reason for a thing before he agreed to it. With her, for reasons he was still untangling, he kept agreeing first and understanding later. And the understanding kept arriving and proving the agreement right, which was a disorienting pattern when you'd spent 4 years trusting almost nobody. The door opened behind him. He didn't turn around. "It's cold," she said. "I know," he said. A pause. Then she came and stood near the railing, not beside him, but close enough that he was aware of her. She had a coat on, and her arms crossed over her chest against the cold. "Are you worried?" she said. He thought about it honestly. "About Blackwell?" "I don't know enough yet to be worried about Blackwell." He paused. "About the ranch, the land. Yes, this is all I have." She didn't say anything soothing. She didn't tell him it would be fine. He was coming to realize that was not her way, and that he actually preferred it to the alternative. "What is it that you're actually afraid of?" she said. "The land itself, or what losing it would mean?" He looked out at the dark shapes of the fences, the barn, the pasture beyond. "My wife was born on this land," he said. It came out before he decided to say it, the way things do at night in the cold when your guard is down and the silence asks something of you. "Her father built this ranch. I married into it, in a sense. I'd worked here before we married, but it was always hers in a way that felt right. Then she died. Then my son died." He stopped. "What's left is mine. But what I mean is, it was theirs first. Losing it would be like losing them again, in a different way." The wind moved through the cottonwoods. He heard them shift and settle. "I understand that," she said quietly. He believed her. "You should go in," he said. "It's too cold out here." "I was going to say the same to you," she said. He almost laughed. Not quite, but almost, and he noticed it because it had been a while since almost was a possibility. She went inside. He stayed a few minutes longer, looking at the land that was his and felt like it might not stay his, and thinking about a woman who had been in his house for 3 days and had already changed the quality of the silence in it. He didn't know what to do with that. He went inside and went to bed and slept, for the first time in longer than he could remember, through the night until morning. On Thursday, they drove to town together. The county recorder's office was a single room attached to the back of the courthouse, maintained by a man named Douglas Pratt, who had been recording land transactions in this county for 22 years and viewed the arrival of anyone with questions about old deeds with the mild wariness of a man guarding a room he considered personally his. He looked at Evelyn over his spectacles when she explained what she wanted. "Survey records," he said, "for a company that filed stakes inside property lines." "I want to know who owns the company," she said, "and whether they filed any formal claims in this county in the last 3 years." "That's a broad search," he said. "I'm patient," she said. Pratt looked at Silas with the expression of a man seeking solidarity. Silas offered none. Pratt showed her the records. She spent 2 hours in that room. Silas waited outside and then waited in the diner across the street with coffee that was considerably worse than what she'd been making at the ranch, and then went back to the courthouse and sat in the hallway. At one point, he heard her ask Pratt a very specific question about cross-referenced filing numbers, in a tone that suggested she already knew the answer and was testing the records against it. She came out at 1:45 carrying her notebook and a paper she'd been permitted to copy by hand. She was not running. She never ran. But she walked with a quality of urgency that had not been there when she went in. She didn't say anything until they were out on the street. "The company on the stake," she said, "Territorial Survey Associates. It was registered 8 months ago." "All right," he said. "The registered agent is an attorney named Colton Burke." She looked at the paper. Burke also represented the opposing party in 3 separate land disputes in this county over the past 4 years. 2 of those disputes resulted in property transfer. Silas felt something cold settle in his chest that was not the November air. "Who won those disputes?" he said. "The opposing parties," she said, "who then sold the acquired land within 6 months to a holding company." She looked up at him. "The holding company's name is different each time, but the attorney who handled all 3 transfers is the same." "Burke," he said. "Burke," she said. She folded the paper and put it in her notebook. "This isn't opportunism," she said. "This is a system. Someone has been building this piece by piece for years." She looked out at the street, the hardware store, the diner, the feed store, the ordinary small-town morning of Red Bluff going about its business. "And I think it's bigger than your ranch, Silas. I think it's the whole valley." He stood on the street in front of the courthouse and looked at the woman beside him and understood for the first time the full dimensions of what he had invited into his life when he wrote a letter looking for someone practical. She was watching him. "Are you all right?" she said. "I'm thinking," he said. "Take your time," she said. He looked at her. "You're not going to suggest we hand this to someone else?" Sheriff? County judge? The county judge signed off on one of those transfers, she said simply. That landed like cold water. Then what do we do? He said. She looked at him with those dark, even eyes, and she said, we keep building the case. We find out who else has been targeted. We go back further in the records. And we make sure that by the time we bring this to anyone with authority, the evidence is so thorough that it cannot be ignored or buried. A man passed them on the street, tipped his hat. Neither of them responded. That'll take time, Silas said. Yes, she said. And meanwhile, he could keep filing claims. Yes, she said, which is why we need to warn the other ranchers, quietly. Today, if we can. He thought about Gus Pedersen and Aldrich Webb, about Tom Halverson and Frank Delacroix, and all the people in this valley whose land sat on the same creek water, whose titles might or might not hold up against a system designed specifically to break them. All right, he said. She nodded once, and they went to get the wagon. He bought the wire he needed at the hardware store, and on the way back they stopped at Pedersen's place, and then at Webb's, and at each stop Evelyn explained without drama what she had found. She laid it out clearly and patiently, and left out nothing important but included only what was documented. Both men listened with the silence of people hearing something they half suspected was coming and had hoped wasn't. Gus Pedersen, who was 63 years old and had ranched this valley since before it had a name, sat on his porch step after she finished talking and was quiet for a long time. My grandfather homesteaded this ground, he said finally. I know, she said, and that title goes back further than any of Blackwell's claims, which is why we need the documentation. You think you can stop him? Gus said. I think we can build something he can't easily dismantle, she said. That's not the same thing, but it's a start. Gus looked at Silas. She yours? Gus said. We have an arrangement, Silas said carefully. Just made the sound of a man who considers that answer insufficient. You should probably upgrade the arrangement, he said, which was the most personal thing Gus Pedersen had said to anyone in recent memory, and Silas didn't answer because he had no idea what to say. They drove home in the early dark, and Evelyn was quiet, writing in her notebook even with the wagon moving, and Silas drove and watched the road and thought about all the things he still didn't know, about Blackwell, about the depth of the scheme, about how far it could go. And underneath all of that, quieter but persistent, he thought about the woman beside him who had arrived 4 days ago with one suitcase and had already changed the shape of his world in ways he was only beginning to map. He didn't say anything about that. He drove. The ranch came into sight around the bend where the cottonwoods were, and the lights were off and the house was dark because nobody was there to turn them on, and Silas pulled the wagon up to the post and climbed down and tied the mare and looked at the dark house. Then he went in and lit the lamp. And Evelyn came in behind him and hung up her coat on the hook by the door. Not her assigned hook, which was on the left, but his, which was on the right. And she caught herself and moved it, and he didn't say anything about that either. But he noticed. He was noticing a great many things he couldn't do anything useful with, and he was learning to hold them carefully and not press on them, the way you hold something fragile in a cold hand, knowing you need to warm up before you can trust your grip. The steer in the south pen had improved. Evelyn checked on it after supper, in the dark, with a lantern, and came back and reported that the shoulder was carrying weight more evenly. Good call, Silas said. You would have caught it, she said. I didn't, he said. She looked at him. You were looking at the whole herd, she said. I was only looking at one animal at a time. He thought about that for a while after she went upstairs. He thought about how that could be true of a great many things. The way, when you've been managing alone long enough, your vision widens to cover everything, and in the covering of everything, you stop seeing any one thing closely. He sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low. Somewhere in the territory, a man named Victor Blackwell was working a system he'd spent years building, and he didn't know yet that a woman with a small notebook and 20 years of watching carefully had started to take it apart. Silas didn't know yet what that would cost them. He only knew that for the first time in 4 years, when he sat at this table, he was not sitting alone with the weight of everything. That was enough, for tonight. That would have to be enough. The legal notice arrived on a Monday. Silas found it nailed to the post at the end of the drive, not delivered through the county office, the way legitimate legal documents were supposed to be, but hammered to the wood with a single nail, the paper already slightly damp from the morning frost. He stood there on the frozen ground, reading it twice before he understood what he was looking at. And then he understood it. And his jaw tightened in a way that Roy, watching from the barn doorway 30 yards away, recognized immediately. Roy walked over. He read it over Silas's shoulder without being invited. Neither man said anything for a moment. The notice claimed that a boundary survey conducted by Territorial Survey Associates on behalf of an unnamed client had identified an encroachment of existing fence lines onto unregistered land, and that the registered owner of the Granger property was hereby notified of a pending boundary dispute filing in the county court, scheduled to be heard within 60 days. 60 days. That's Burke's signature at the bottom, Roy said. I know, Silas said. He pulled the notice off the post and carried it back to the house. Evelyn was at the kitchen table when he came in, her notebook open, the county deed copies she'd made spread out in a pattern that made sense to her, and probably only to her. She looked up when she saw his face, and he set the paper on the table in front of her without speaking. She read it. She read it again. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, which was the closest thing to an expression of frustration he'd seen from her. Not panic, not fear. Just a person absorbing something unwelcome and making room for it. 60 days, she said. That's what it says. They moved faster than I expected, she said. She looked at the paper again. This is not how a legitimate boundary dispute is filed. You don't nail notices to fence posts at dawn. You serve them through the county clerk. So it's illegal, Roy said from the doorway. It's irregular, she said carefully. Whether it's illegal depends on the territorial code. I'd need to look at the exact statutes. She looked at Silas. But the fact that they chose this method tells us something. What does it tell us? Silas said. That they wanted to frighten you, she said. A document served through the proper channel gives you time, resources, a paper trail that a court would see. A notice nailed to a fence post in the dark. That's meant to feel like something closing in on you. They want you angry and scared and reactive. Roy leaned against the doorframe. Well, he said, it's working. I know, she said. She looked at Silas. Which is why you're not going to ride into town and do anything about it today. Silas had in fact been considering exactly that. Riding into town and doing something about it today had been his entire plan from the moment he read the notice, which was why having it articulated back to him in those plain terms was mildly irritating. I'm not going to just sit here, he said. I know you're not, she said. But there's a difference between doing something useful and doing something that makes you feel better for 20 minutes and gives Blackwell exactly what he's hoping for. She picked up the notice. If you ride in there today and argue about this notice, you confirm they reached you, you show them you're unnerved, and you give Burke an opportunity to get in front of a judge before we have anything to counter with. She set it down. Give me 3 days. 3 days, he said. 2, if I work faster, she said. I need to go back to the county records and look at the other 2 disputed properties, the ones that transferred. I need to see the original survey documents and compare them to the deeds. If Burke is using the same surveyor every time and the same method, the same man keeps appearing, Silas said slowly. She looked up at him. You said that, he said, Bert, the first night. You said the same attorney, the same surveyor. Yes, she said. If we can show the same surveyor appears in all of these disputes, then the surveyor isn't independent, she said. And if the surveyor isn't independent, every survey he's produced becomes suspect. Every boundary claim built on his work becomes a question mark. She held his gaze. But I need the original documents to prove it. I need names, dates, filing numbers, the kind of thing that can be verified against payroll records or company registrations. He stood there. 3 days felt like a very long time when someone had just nailed a legal notice to your fence post before sunrise. But he had learned in 2 weeks that Evelyn Mercer's assessments tended to be right, and her timelines tended to be accurate, and the times he had trusted her read of a situation over his own impulse had not yet resulted in anything he regretted. 3 days, he said. Thank you, she said, and she meant it plainly, without performance, which was how she said most things. Roy pushed off from the doorframe and went back to work. Silas poured himself coffee and sat down, and they worked at the same table in the silence they'd developed over 2 weeks. Not uncomfortable silence, not tense silence, but the particular quiet of 2 people thinking hard in the same room, and finding it more productive than thinking alone. She went to town the next morning before he was fully awake. He heard her on the stairs at 4:30, heard the door, heard the wagon leave the yard. He lay in the dark for a moment, and then got up and did the morning feed himself, which was fine, and started breakfast, which was less fine because his cooking had not substantially improved, and had coffee ready when Roy arrived. Roy looked at the empty chair at the corner of the table. "She went to the records office," Silas said. "Before dawn?" "She wanted to be there when it opened." Roy poured coffee and sat down. "You're not worried about her going alone?" "She's been going alone to places since she was 16, Silas said. "She traveled 4 states with a physician. She's not—" He stopped. He was going to say she's not delicate, which was true, but felt dismissive of something more specific. "She's capable," he said instead. Roy nodded slowly. "I know she is." He paused. "I'm asking if you're worried." Silas looked at him. Roy looked back, bland and patient, the expression of a man who has learned to wait for answers that people aren't quite ready to give yet. "Drink your coffee," Silas said. Roy did, without commenting further, which was one of the things Silas valued most about him. She came back at mid-afternoon. She came back with 8 pages of hand-copied records and the controlled expression of a person who has found what they were looking for and is carefully managing their reaction to it. She spread the pages on the kitchen table, and Silas and Roy sat across from her, and she walked them through it methodically. The surveyor's name was Elias Froke. He had submitted survey documents in connection with 4 separate land disputes in this county over the past 5 years. In all 4 cases, the survey supported the claim of the opposing party against the original landowner. In 3 of the 4 cases, Burke had served as attorney for the opposing party. In the 4th case, a different attorney had signed the papers, but the holding company that subsequently purchased the land was registered at the same address as 2 of Burke's other corporate clients. "They used a different attorney once," Roy said. "To create the appearance of separation," Evelyn said. "If it's always the same attorney and the same surveyor, it becomes a pattern anyone can see. Mix it up once and it looks like coincidence." She tapped the page. "But the address connects them, and Froke's name appears every time." Silas looked at the pages. "Where is Froke based?" "Helena," she said. "He has a registered survey practice there, but his filings in this county are all dated within a few days of each other each time, meaning he came down specifically for these cases, didn't maintain any ongoing work here." "Someone brought him in each time," Silas said, "and paid for his travel," she said. "A genuine independent surveyor working a random dispute wouldn't travel from Helena for a county boundary case unless the fee was significant. A surveyor on retainer would." Roy leaned back in his chair. "Can we prove he was on retainer?" "Not yet," she said, "but company payroll records, if we can access those, would show it. And the Territorial Land Commission has authority to subpoena those records." Silas looked up. "The commission." "There's a Territorial Land Commission," she said. "They oversee land grants and survey conduct across the territory. A surveyor who falsifies documents in multiple proceedings falls under their jurisdiction, not just the county court." She looked at Silas steadily. "If we file a complaint with the commission rather than defending in county court, we change the terrain. Burke's case is built to operate in county court, before a judge who signed off on one of his transfers. The commission operates independently." Roy made a low sound of comprehension. "You don't fight on his ground," Silas said slowly. "If you can help it," she said. "No." That evening, after Roy had gone home and the supper things were cleared and the lamp was burning low on the table, Silas found himself doing something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. He talked. Not about the land case, not about Blackwell or Burke or Elias Froke. He talked about the ranch, about the early years, about the first winter he'd worked here as a hired hand before he'd married into the family, about the way Margaret's father had run the operation with a kind of stubborn optimism that Silas had found baffling at the time and had come to understand only gradually. He talked about his son, whose name was Daniel, and who had been 4 years old when he died, and he said the name out loud, which he almost never did, and his voice did what it did when he said it, which was catch for just a second, and he let it catch, and kept talking. Evelyn listened. She didn't insert herself into it, didn't redirect it, didn't try to offer something. She just listened with her hands wrapped around her cup and her eyes on him, and occasionally she asked a small question, not a therapeutic question, not a leading one, just something that showed she was following the thread. What was the ranch like in those early years? What had Margaret's father taught him that he hadn't expected to learn? At some point, he noticed it was past 9 o'clock, which was later than either of them usually sat up. He stopped, looked at his hands. "Sorry," he said. That's more than I usually." "Don't apologize," she said quietly. "I don't usually talk like that," he said. "I know," she said. "You can tell. You're out of practice." There was no criticism in it. She said it the way she said most things, just as observation, just as fact. I was out of practice with talking, the same way the ranch had been out of practice with maintenance. Things accumulated when you were managing alone. "What about you?" he said. She looked at him. "You know more about me now than most people in this county," he said. "What about your life? Before Montana?" She was quiet for a moment, deciding something. "My mother left when I was 9, she said. She wasn't suited for the life my father lived, moving every few months, never settling. I don't blame her. I didn't at the time either, which my father thought was either very mature or very worrying, and he could never decide which." A small pause. "I stayed with my father because I wanted to, because the work suited me, because learning things suited me, and I learned something new in every county we passed through." "Did you want to settle?" he said. "At any point?" She looked at the table. "Once," she said. "There was a family in Kansas, the Aldermans. We stayed with them for almost a year when my father had a fever and couldn't travel. I learned what it felt like to wake up in the same room 2 mornings in a row and know what the next week would look like." She paused. "I liked it more than I expected. But then my father recovered and we moved on, and I told myself I was fine with that." "Were you?" "Mostly," she said. "Not entirely." She looked up at him. "That's an honest answer." "It's the kind I prefer," he said. She smiled then. Not the almost smile he'd been catching glimpses of since she arrived, but an actual one, brief and unguarded, there and gone in a second. He noted it the way you note something you want to remember accurately, because the brain has a way of improving on things after the fact, and he wanted to keep this one as it was. "Go to sleep, Silas," she said. "You too," he said. They went upstairs and he lay in the dark for 20 minutes, thinking about Kansas and about a woman who had talked herself into being fine with things, and how that was something he understood from the inside. The first threat came on a Wednesday. It came in the form of a letter, delivered this time through the actual post office, addressed to Evelyn by name. Margaret from this post office gave it to Silas with an expression that suggested she had noticed the handwriting and the lack of a return address and had formed opinions about it. He brought it to Evelyn unopened. She opened it. She read it once, and her face went the specific kind of still it went when she was processing something she didn't want to visibly react to, the absolute controlled stillness that he'd come to understand was her version of a strong emotion being carefully managed. She handed it to him. It was brief. It said, "A woman who minds her own affairs lives longer than one who doesn't. Go home." No signature. He read it twice and felt something rise in his chest that was not the cautious, watchful feeling he'd been operating with for the past 2 weeks. It was older and simpler than that. It was anger. "This goes to the commission with everything else," she said. Her voice was even. "Documentation of intimidation is part of the pattern." "Evelyn," he said. "I know," she said. "Do you want to—" he started. He didn't know how to finish it. "Do you want to stop?" Felt wrong. "Do you want to be careful?" Felt condescending. What he actually meant was something closer to, "I want you to tell me what you need from me right now, and I will do exactly that," which was more than he knew how to say. She looked at him. "I'm not going home," she said. "I don't have a home to go to. This is where I am." She said it simply, without heat, without the drama it might have carried if someone else had said it. Just a plain statement of fact. "And even if I did, I wouldn't leave because someone nailed a threat to a piece of paper and paid 2 cents to mail it." He looked at her for a moment. "All right," he said. "But I would like it," she said more quietly, "if you didn't tell Roy about this one. He'll want to ride into town and find whoever sent it, and we can't afford that right now." He nodded. He folded the letter and put it in the box where she kept the evidence, and he didn't tell Roy. But he also, from that day forward, did not let her go to town alone. He didn't announce this policy. He didn't ask her permission. He simply made sure, every time she needed to go somewhere, that he had a reason to go in the same direction, and she was perceptive enough to understand what he was doing within about 2 days, and she didn't argue with him about it, which told him she understood the threat was real, even if she wasn't going to let it change her work. They developed a rhythm. She spent mornings in the county records when they needed to be there, and afternoons at the kitchen table organizing what she'd found. And Silas worked the ranch until noon and then came in and sat with her, reading through documents she'd set aside for him to review, asking questions when he had them. Roy managed the afternoon operations without being asked to, which was Roy's particular gift, understanding when something else needed to be the priority and adjusting without commentary. 2 days after the letter, Evelyn asked to speak with Gus Peterson's wife. Silas hadn't thought of Helen Pedersen as a relevant part of this. She was 60, quiet, had lived on that ranch since she was 19. She rarely came to town. Her land, Evelyn said, the south parcel, the one the survey stakes appeared closest to. Gus said his wife's name is on the original deed. Silas thought about it. That's right. Her family's grant, transferred at marriage. Which means if there's a legal challenge to that parcel, she's the named party, Evelyn said. Not Gus. She may have documents her husband doesn't even know she has. Family records, original grant papers, correspondence from when the land was first settled. They rode out to the Pedersen place on a Thursday afternoon, and it turned out Evelyn was right. Not because she was always right, but because she had a habit of looking for the thing other people forgot to look at. Helen Pedersen kept a cedar box under the bed in the back room that she hadn't opened in 15 years, and inside it was the original homestead grant paper from 1871, signed by the territorial governor, with a hand-drawn survey map that predated any of Froke's work by 2 decades. Helen Pedersen sat on the edge of the bed holding that paper and looked at Evelyn. "This helps?" she said. Her voice was careful, the voice of someone who has been told things would be fine before and knows that's not a guarantee. "This is significant," Evelyn said. "It establishes the boundary of your property before any of the current disputes were filed. If anyone tries to claim your land was improperly surveyed, you have the original grant showing where the line was placed in 1871 by the territorial authority itself." "But it's just paper," Helen said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Paper that's older, more authoritative, and more official than anything Burke has filed." She paused. "May I copy the relevant portions? The originals should stay with you. In fact, I'd suggest keeping them somewhere other than under the bed, somewhere fireproof if you have it." Helen looked at Gus, who had been standing in the doorway saying nothing. "She's right about the fireproof part," Gus said. They brought the copies home, and Evelyn added them to the growing file with the focus of someone placing a piece in a structure that was slowly becoming something weight-bearing. The fence cutting started the following week. Roy found it first. A section of the east line, 3 posts down, the wire cut cleanly. Not broken, not rusted through. Cut, with something sharp and deliberate, sometime in the night. 6 of the Granger cattle had drifted through into the neighboring strip of unregistered land before Roy found them. Getting them back took most of the morning. Roy came to the house at noon with mud on his boots and a look on his face that was past the careful version of anger and into the plain version. "That's not wind damage," he said. "No," Silas said. Evelyn came to stand in the kitchen doorway. "Which section?" she said. "East line," Roy said. "Same end where the stakes were." "How many posts?" 3 cut, 4 pushed. Something drove into one of the posts, horse or wagon, hard to say. She went to get her coat. "You don't need to," Silas started. "I want to see it," she said. They went out to the east line, all 3 of them. Evelyn stood at the cut section and looked at it for a long time without saying anything. She looked at the angle of the cut. She looked at the ground around the base of the posts. It had rained 2 days ago, and the ground still held impressions. She crouched down. "2 horses," she said. "Not shod the same. One has a worn shoe on the right rear." She stood up. "They came from the north side, along the fence line, not across the field." She looked north. "The road that runs north of your property, who uses that?" "Anyone going between here and the Ridge properties," Silas said. "It's not a main road. Maybe 6, 8 families use it regular." "And anyone else who doesn't want to be seen on the main road," Roy said. Evelyn looked at the cut wire again. "Document this before you repair it," she said. "Measure the cuts, note the post damage, record the hoof impressions. Everything." You want me to leave the fence cut? Roy said. For one day, she said. Document it, then repair it. Don't move the cattle before I've drawn the positions of where they drifted. Roy looked at Silas with the expression of a man who is about 3 days away from simply accepting that this is how things work now. Get the measuring tape, Silas said. They documented it. Evelyn drew it. She added it to the file with the date, the time discovered, the number of cattle affected, the economic impact. That same week, a similar thing happened at Webb's place, and then at Frank Delacroix's north fence. Not the same night, spread out several days apart, as if whoever was doing it wanted to make sure each incident got its own moment of anxiety and damage before the next one arrived. Silas rode to each property. Evelyn asked to come to 2 of them, and he took her, and at each one she asked the same questions. Angle of cut, approach direction, soil impressions, timing. She built a map of the incidents in her notebook that showed a pattern of movement, the same general approach direction, the north road, the same night work methodology. Frank Delacroix, who was a large, quiet man who had punched exactly one person in his adult life and had never fully regretted it, stood looking at Evelyn's map with his arms crossed. Same people every time, he said. Almost certainly, she said. Which means this is coordinated. It's not opportunistic vandalism. This is designed to cost you money and time and make you feel like your land is already slipping away from you. Is it working? Frank said, which was directed at Silas. On me? Silas said. No. It's making me angry, Frank said. Good, Evelyn said. Frank looked at her. Anger is appropriate, she said. Fear is what they want. Anger properly directed is useful. She looked back at the map. What I need from all of you, from every rancher who's been hit, is documented losses, dollar amounts, hours lost, cattle that needed to be recovered, fence that had to be repaired, missed workdays, everything with a number attached to it. Why? Frank said. Because destruction of property and economic intimidation in service of a fraudulent land claim is not just a civil matter, she said. It's criminal, and criminal complaints require documented harm. Frank uncrossed his arms. He looked at her with the look of a man recalibrating. I'll get you the numbers, he said. She got numbers from everyone. She compiled them in a separate section of the file. The total, when she added it up on a Friday evening, was a figure that made Silas sit back in his chair. That's real damage, he said. Yes, she said, and it's provable. And it all connects to the same period of time in which Territorial Survey Associates filed its boundary claims. She turned a page in her notebook. I need you to understand something, Silas. He looked at her. What we're building here is not a defense, she said. A defense is reactive. It responds to what Blackwell files, fights each claim one at a time, spends money and time in a system he controls. What I'm building is an indictment, a complete documented case that goes to the commission and demonstrates that everything he's done in this valley is connected, coordinated, and fraudulent. He was quiet, processing. That's different from what I expected when you first said 3 days, he said. I know, she said. I didn't know yet how deep it went. She looked at him steadily. Are you all right with this being bigger than you thought? Are you? He said. She considered it. It scares me some, she said. And he noted she said it without hesitation, without trying to present herself as something she wasn't. Men like Blackwell have resources and connections, and they don't accept losing without fighting back harder. She paused. But the alternative is watching this valley get taken apart piece by piece and knowing I saw how it was being done and didn't finish what I started. Then we keep going, he said. She nodded. Outside it was full dark, and the wind had come up, and somewhere in the pasture the cattle were settled and the fence Roy had repaired was holding, and Victor Blackwell was presumably sitting somewhere in the territory confident that fear and time and money were doing their work on the people he'd targeted. What he did not know, what nobody who had not sat at this kitchen table in the past 3 weeks could have known, was the breadth of what was accumulating in a series of notebooks and copied documents in a ranch house off the North Road. The second threatening letter came 10 days after the first. This one was different. This one didn't tell Evelyn to go home. This one named Silas. It said, "A man who lets a woman do his fighting loses more than land." He found it in the Morning Post. He read it, and he stood at the post road for a moment, and he put it in his coat pocket, and he went back to the house, and he did not give it to Evelyn. He sat with it at the kitchen table while she was upstairs, and he read it twice more, and he thought about what it meant that they were naming him now. It meant they were watching closely enough to have tracked the shape of what was happening. It meant someone had noticed that the investigation was not coming from a panicked rancher, but from the woman in his house. And it meant they were trying a different kind of pressure, the kind aimed not at Evelyn's nerve, but at Silas's pride. He put the letter in the evidence box when she wasn't looking. He did not tell her about that one for 3 days, which was wrong of him, and he knew it was wrong, and when she found it because she reviewed everything in the box regularly, and he should have known she would. She looked at him with an expression that was not angry, but was not comfortable either. "This is evidence," she said. "I know," he said. "You kept it from me." "I kept it from you for 3 days," he said, "and I know that's not—" "Why?" He looked at the table. "Because I didn't want you to think I was letting it get to me." "Were you?" A pause. "A little," he said. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. "Silas," she said, "I need you to not do that again. Whatever they send, whatever they say, I need to see it. Because every one of these tells me something about how frightened they are and what they think will work." She held up the letter. "This one tells me they've changed tactics. They're not trying to scare me away anymore. They're trying to make you feel weak, which means they've figured out we're doing this together, and they don't know how to attack that, so they're trying to divide it." He looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. He meant it. "I know," she said. She set the letter down. "Don't do it again." "I won't," he said. She held his gaze for a second, and there was something in the quality of that exchange, the directness of it, the fact that she had said "we" without seeming to notice she'd said it, that landed somewhere in his chest in a way he did not examine immediately, filed away instead, the way you file something you're not ready to open. The following week, Evelyn wrote the complaint. She wrote it at the kitchen table over the course of 3 days, and it was unlike anything Silas had read before in his life. It was 31 pages long. It covered 5 years of documented fraud, 4 contested properties, 2 cases of confirmed property, transfer through manipulated survey evidence, 1 surveyor with a provable financial connection to the opposing party in multiple disputes, documented intimidation including physical property damage and written threats, and an analysis of the creek water rights that showed the coherent strategic logic behind every individual claim. That this was never about boundary disputes, that it had always been about controlling the valley's water access, which would have given a single landowner effective economic authority over the entire ranching community. It named Victor Blackwell. It named Elias Froke. It named Colton Burke. When she finished it, she read it back to herself once, sitting alone at the table after Silas had gone to bed, and she made 17 small corrections with a steady hand, and then she set it down and sat in the lamplight for a while. Roy came by early the next morning, before Silas was down, and found her at the table with the completed document. He read the first 5 pages. He set them down. "You wrote all this," he said. "Yes," she said. "In 3 days. I had 4 years of notes to draw from," she said. In a manner of speaking. Roy looked at her for a long moment. He was not a man who showed things easily on his face, but what was on his face right now was something close to awe, held in the careful container of a man who considered awe a private emotion. "I'll make the coffee," he said. Silas came down 20 minutes later to find Roy and Evelyn at the table, Roy reading through the later pages of the complaint with his coffee going cold, and Evelyn watching him read with the look of someone waiting for a structural assessment from a person whose opinion they respected. "What is this?" Silas said. "The complaint," Evelyn said. He sat down. He picked up the first page. He started reading. He read for 40 minutes. He didn't speak. Roy finished and passed pages back, and Silas moved through them in order, and the kitchen was quiet except for the fire in the stove and the wind outside and the occasional sound of a page being set down carefully. When he finished, he put the last page on the table and looked at her. He didn't say anything for a moment. "This is enough?" he said finally. "I believe so," she said. "The commission has authority to freeze all active claims while they investigate. Once they review this, Blackwell can't file anything new that will stick. And the criminal referral section," she touched the last several pages, "that goes to the territorial attorney, not the county, out of Burke's influence. You thought of that, he said. I had time to think, she said. Roy stood up and took his cup to the basin and rinsed it out, which was what Roy did when he was giving two people space he thought they needed. Silas looked at the 31 pages on his kitchen table. 4 years ago, he had built walls around everything that mattered to him and told himself it was practical, and told himself it was sensible, and told himself that a man who had lost what he'd lost had no business opening the door again. He had written a letter asking for someone practical, someone who could help manage the ranch, someone who would not complicate a life he had stripped down to function and habit and the daily maintenance of keeping something alive. He had gotten this. He had gotten 31 pages of evidence assembled by a woman who woke at 4 in the morning and fixed broken cabinet handles and noticed which steer was favoring a shoulder, and had crossed 4 states in a wagon reading territorial land bulletins, and had somehow walked into his life carrying 1 suitcase and immediately begun rebuilding everything she touched. He was not, at this moment, thinking about the commission. He was thinking about the porch, and the night she'd stood next to him in the cold and said, I understand that when he talked about loss, and the morning she'd said that's not the same thing when he said he got through the winters, and all the small accumulated moments of the past 3 weeks that he had been carefully not looking directly at. Evelyn, he said. She looked at him. He said, Thank you. She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved in her expression, that same barely perceptible opening he'd seen once or twice before. The quality of a door that is not all the way closed. Don't thank me yet, she said. We still have to send it. We send it tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. Roy reappeared in the doorway with his coat on and his hat in his hand, and said he was going to check the south pasture. Nobody told him the south pasture was fine. He went out, and the door closed behind him, and Silas and Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with 31 pages of careful, painstaking truth between them, and outside the window. The Montana morning was doing what Montana mornings do in November, cold and gray and demanding, the kind of morning that does not offer anything easily. But the document was finished, and they were going to send it. And for the first time since the survey stake had appeared on the east fence line, Silas felt something shift in the weight of it. Not relief, nothing that definite, but the feeling of ground under his feet where there had been water, the particular steadiness that comes when you stop trying to hold everything alone and finally let someone stand beside you. He picked up his coffee cup. She picked up hers. They sat there in the ordinary quiet of a kitchen on a Montana morning, and for a little while neither of them said anything at all, and that was exactly enough. They sent the complaint on a Tuesday morning, which was an ordinary Tuesday in every other respect. Cold, overcast, the kind of flat gray sky that sits on Montana like a lid through most of November. Silas drove. Evelyn sat beside him with the document in a leather satchel she held on her lap with both hands, not clutching it, just holding it with the particular awareness of someone carrying something that took a long time to build and cannot be rebuilt if lost. Roy had offered to come. Evelyn had said no. If something goes wrong, she'd said, I need you at the ranch. Not as protection, as witness. Someone who was here, who knows what's been happening, who can speak to it if needed. Roy had looked at her with the expression he'd been wearing more frequently in recent weeks, the one that said he had long since stopped underestimating her and was now simply paying attention. All right, he'd said, and stayed. The Territorial Commission office was housed in a 2-story building at the edge of the county seat, 40 miles from Red Bluff. A longer drive than the county recorder's office, long enough that they left before first light and arrived as the town was just beginning to open its doors. The building had a painted sign above the entrance that had weathered badly enough that the middle word was nearly illegible, and the steps leading up to it needed repair, and none of that inspired particular confidence. Silas held the door. Evelyn went in. The clerk at the front desk was a young man with ink-stained fingers who looked up from his ledger with the automatic wariness of a government employee encountering civilians before 9 in the morning. We're filing a complaint, Evelyn said, under the Territorial Land Survey Act, Section 4, relating to fraudulent survey conduct and coordinated land claim manipulation. The clerk blinked. I'll need to see the senior clerk, she said pleasantly. They waited 22 minutes. Silas sat in a wooden chair against the wall and watched her stand near the window, perfectly still, the satchel in her hands, her face showing nothing particular. He thought about how she looked at the stage stop that first day. The way she stepped down without waiting for assistance, took one look at the crowd assembled to inspect her, and walked straight to him. The same quality of stillness, the same refusal to be made small by a situation designed to feel larger than her. The senior clerk was a heavy-set man named Aldous Greer, who came out from the back with his suspenders half adjusted, and the expression of a man interrupted from something he considered more important than whatever was about to happen. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at Silas. He looked back at Evelyn. "You're filing a complaint," he said. "A formal complaint and criminal referral," she said. 31 pages, fully documented, with attached copies of all reference survey filings, property transfer records, deed histories, and testimony summaries. She opened the satchel and set the document on the counter between them. "I've also prepared a one-page summary for the commission chairman, should he wish a preliminary overview before the full review." Greer looked at the document. He picked it up. He looked at the first page, which had the names Blackwell, Burke, and Froke listed in the opening paragraph under the heading Named Parties. His expression changed, not dramatically, not in a way that would have been visible to someone not paying close attention. But Silas was paying close attention, and what he saw was a man who recognized at least one of those names and was now recalibrating what kind of morning this was going to be. "I'll need to review this before I can accept it formally," Greer said. "Of course," Evelyn said. "I'll wait." He looked at her. "It may take some time," he said. "I have time," she said. He took the document to the back. They waited. Silas got up twice and looked out the window at the street below, and sat back down. Evelyn did not sit. She stood near the window the entire time, and once, when he caught her eye, she gave him a small nod that meant nothing specific but felt like something. Greer came back after 40 minutes. He set the document on the counter. "The commission will formally receive this," he said. He had the manner of a man who has looked at something and understood that how he handles the next 5 minutes will matter. "I want to be clear that receipt does not constitute a determination. I understand that," Evelyn said. "All I'm asking is formal receipt and the standard acknowledgement that the complaint is under review. Per Section 4 of the Territorial Act, that acknowledgement freezes all active claims by named parties pending investigation." Greer looked at her. "You know the statute," he said. "I read it 4 times, she said. "I wanted to be sure." Another pause. Greer picked up a stamp from beside his ledger and pressed it to the front page of the document and signed his name beneath it and wrote the date. "Formally received," he said. "You'll be notified of the commission's response within 30 days." "Thank you," she said. She picked up the stamped receipt he slid across the counter, put it in the satchel, and turned toward the door. Silas held it open. On the steps outside in the cold gray morning, she stopped and stood for a moment with her eyes closed. Just a moment. Then she opened them. "All right," she said to no one in particular. "All right," he said back. They walked to the wagon. On the drive home, she was quiet for the first hour, and he let her be quiet, and somewhere past the halfway point she said, without preamble, "I keep thinking about what happens if it doesn't work." He didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road. "You've thought about that," she said. It wasn't a question. "Since the day we found the first stake," he said. And I don't have a better option than what you've built," he said, "so I stopped spending time on it." She looked at him. "That's either very pragmatic or very brave." "It's neither," he said. "It's just, you work with what you have in front of you." She was quiet again for a while. The road was rough through a particular stretch near the creek crossing, and he slowed down, and she braced herself without comment against the door. "My father used to say that," she said eventually. "Work with what's in front of you?" "Close enough," she said. He said, "When you're in the middle of something difficult, the only question worth asking is what you can do right now, not what you should have done differently, not what might happen. What can you do right now?" "Sounds like a sensible man," Silas said. "He was," she said. "He was also stubborn and terrible at asking for help and convinced he could manage everything alone until about 6 months before he died, when he finally admitted he'd been sick for longer than he'd let on." She said it evenly, but there was something under it that she was managing the way she managed most things, by keeping her voice level and her hands still. He was a good man who didn't know how to let people help him. Silas didn't say anything for a moment. "I know someone like that," he said carefully. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "You're not as bad as he was," she said after a moment. "High praise," he said. "I mean it genuinely," she said, and he heard the small shift in her voice that meant she was speaking more carefully than usual, choosing the words rather than simply saying them. "You've let me help. With all of this. I know that wasn't easy." He thought about the first days, about standing at the fence line digging post holes rather than go into town, about the letter he'd hidden and the 3 days he'd waited to show her. "Not always gracefully," he said. "No," she agreed, "but you did it. That matters." The creek crossing came up, and he slowed, and they crossed it with the particular lurching clatter of a wagon on wet stones. And neither of them spoke until they were through, and then she said, "How much further?" 20 minutes, he said. "Good," she said. "I want to check on the south pasture steer when we get back." He smiled at that. Not a big smile, not the kind anyone watching would call notable. Just a quiet thing that happened to his face because the woman beside him had just filed a 31-page criminal complaint with a territorial government office, and her follow-up concern was a steer with a recovering shoulder problem. He drove the last 20 minutes without speaking, and it was a good silence, the best kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. The commission's response arrived in 12 days, not 30. The letter came through the official post, addressed to both Evelyn Mercer and Silas Granger, which Silas noted because official correspondence did not typically acknowledge women as named parties in territorial legal matters, and the fact that someone at the commission had chosen to include her name felt like a signal of some kind. The letter stated that the Territorial Land Commission had reviewed the submitted complaint and found sufficient grounds to open a formal investigation. Effective immediately, all active survey claims and pending boundary dispute filings by Territorial Survey Associates were frozen pending investigation. The Commission had additionally forwarded the criminal referral section of the complaint to the Territorial Attorney General's office. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Evelyn read the letter twice, standing in the kitchen. Then she sat down in the chair at the corner of the table. Her chair, the one she'd made her own without discussion over the course of weeks. And she put the letter on the table, and she put her hands flat on top of it, and she breathed. Silas watched her from across the table. "It worked," he said. "The first part worked," she said. "The hearing is where it either holds or falls apart, but the claims are frozen." "Yes," she said. She looked up at him. "He can't file anything new. Whatever he was planning for the spring, the water rights acquisition, the additional boundary claims, he can't move on any of it until the investigation concludes." Silas sat down. He was quiet for a moment. "Blackwell knows now," he said. "He knows who filed it." "He probably knew before this letter," she said. "Greer would have contacted Burke the same day we filed. That's how these things work." She paused. "He's been thinking about us for almost 2 weeks." "He hasn't done anything," Silas said. The fence lines had held, no new letters, no new stakes, nothing that could be seen. "I know," she said. "That worries me more than when he was cutting fences." Silas looked at her. "A man who responds immediately is angry," she said. "A man who goes quiet is planning." She was right about that too. They found out what he was planning on a Thursday, when Tom Halverson rode out to the ranch in the early afternoon and tied his horse at the post with the look of a man carrying something uncomfortable. Silas met him at the porch. "I've got something to tell you," Tom said. "And I'm telling you because you need to know it, not because I think it's true." "Tell me," Silas said. Tom looked past him at the house. "Is the woman, Evelyn, is she inside?" "She's in town," Silas said. She'd gone to the county records again. There were supplementary documents she wanted copies of before the hearing, details she'd thought of at 3 in the morning and written down so she wouldn't lose them. Tom came inside and sat at the kitchen table and turned his hat in his hands. "Blackwell has been talking," he said. "In town. Not directly. You know how he works, it's never him directly. But there's a story going around that the complaint that was filed against him was put together using stolen documents from the county recorder's office." Silas went very still. "He's saying Evelyn took documents she wasn't authorized to access," Tom said. "He's saying she copied things she was never given permission to copy, and that the complaint is built on improperly obtained evidence." "She asked permission for everything she copied," Silas said. His voice was flat. "Greer gave her permission." "I know that," Tom said. "I believe that. But the story is out there, And Burke is apparently preparing a motion to have the complaint dismissed on those grounds before the hearing even happens. Silas sat down. He sat at the table and looked at the surface of it. The grain of the wood, the small scar near the edge where a cast iron pan had been set down too hard sometime in the distant past. And he breathed through the anger very carefully, the way Evelyn had described to him once, not suppressing it, just keeping it from running ahead of his thinking. Does Pratt, the recorder, does he keep a log of what's been copied? He said. I would assume so, Tom said. Then there's a record, Silas said, of every document she requested, every permission granted, every copy made. Tom looked at him. You think like she thinks now, he said. I've been in the same room with her for 6 weeks, Silas said. It's contagious. Tom's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. What do you need from me? Witnesses, Silas said. Anyone who was in the recorder's office on any of the days she was there. Anyone who saw her ask for documents, saw Pratt give permission. Names, dates if they can remember. I'll ask around, Tom said. Today, Silas said. Today, Tom agreed. He was gone within 20 minutes. Silas sat at the table for a while, and then he did something he would not have done 6 weeks ago. He did not pace. He did not ride out to burn off the anger. He got the evidence box and went through every entry Evelyn had made, every note about which documents she'd copied and when, and he made a clean list of dates, items, and any detail that could be independently verified. She came home at 4:30. He told her. She set her satchel on the table and sat down and listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Burke is trying to disqualify the evidence before anyone examines it, she said. That's what it looks like, he said. Does Pratt keep a copy ledger? I asked Tom to find out. She looked at the list he'd made. She looked at it for a long time. You did this while I was gone, she said. I needed something to do, he said. She looked up at him. This is good, she said. This is exactly what we need. She picked up the list. If Pratt's ledger matches this, and if we can get signed statements from anyone who witnessed the requests, Burke's motion falls apart. You can't claim documents were stolen when the recorder's own log shows they were properly authorized. Can we get that before the hearing? He said. We have 5 weeks, she said. Yes. The next 2 weeks were the most complicated of Silas's adult life, which was saying something because his adult life had included a grief so total that it had restructured his entire understanding of what living meant. But grief, at least, was simple in its demands. It asked only that you endure it. What he was living through now required endurance and action and constant judgment about which of the two was needed at any given moment, and the line between them shifted daily. Evelyn spent 3 days at the recorder's office, with Silas present each time, sitting in the hallway or in the clerk's front room, visible, a witness to her presence and her methods. Douglas Pratt, to his credit, was a man who took his records seriously, and when Evelyn explained that a motion was being prepared claiming she had improperly accessed his files, his reaction was the reaction of a man whose professional integrity had been called into question. He pulled his copy ledger. Every document she'd ever requested was there, dated, noted with his initials beside each entry indicating authorization. I initialed every one, he said, with the quiet indignation of a 22-year veteran of county record-keeping. Every single one. I know, Evelyn said. Would you be willing to provide a sworn statement to that effect? He looked at her over his spectacles. A woman comes into my office, asks permission, waits for permission, copies what she's permitted to copy, and puts everything back exactly as she found it. And someone is telling the commission she stole something? He reached for his pen. Where do I sign? They got Pratt's statement. They got statements from 2 other people who had been present on different days, a title searcher named Willis Cobb, and old Margaret from the Red Bluff post office, who had been dropping off correspondence at the county offices on a Wednesday morning and had passed Evelyn in the hallway and exchanged pleasantries while Pratt walked them both through the archive room. Margaret's statement was, in Silas's opinion, the most devastating, because Margaret wrote the way Margaret spoke, plainly, specifically, and with the offended precision of a woman who had been providing honest postal service to the community for 19 years and did not appreciate being adjacent to a lie. I witnessed Miss Mercer request each document verbally and wait for Mr. Pratt's spoken approval before removing anything from the shelves. At no time did she take anything without asking. I have been coming to this office for years, and I have never seen anyone more careful with the public records than she was on that morning. Burke's motion to dismiss was filed on a Monday. Evelyn's response, attaching Pratt's ledger copy and all 3 statements, was filed on Wednesday. They did not hear anything official for 2 weeks. The silence was its own kind of pressure, not the active pressure of cut fences and threatening letters, but the particular weight of waiting for something that matters enormously and that you cannot hurry by working harder. Life on the ranch continued. The steer had fully recovered. 3 new calves were born in the cold, early, all of them healthy. Roy replaced the barn roof section properly with new boards that didn't flex in the wind. The kitchen garden, frozen through November, was already being planned for spring. Evelyn had drawn a layout on paper one evening, nothing elaborate, just practical, what would grow, where, in what rotation. Silas found the drawing on the table one morning before she was up, and he stood there looking at it for a while. A kitchen garden diagram was a small thing. It was a person thinking about spring. It was a person assuming they would still be here in spring, that the land would still be theirs, that there was a future on the other side of whatever the commission decided. He folded the drawing carefully and put it back exactly where it had been. 3 days before the hearing, Victor Blackwell came to Red Bluff. He didn't come quietly. He came with 2 men in a rented carriage, wearing a coat that cost more than most ranchers in the valley made in a season, and he went to the hotel and took 2 rooms and had dinner in the dining room, and he did not make any effort to be unobserved. This was, Evelyn said when Roy brought the news, intentional. He wants people to see him, she said. Wealth and confidence. He wants anyone who's been wavering to look at him and think about what it costs to be on the wrong side of a man like that. Is it working? Roy said. Probably on some people, she said honestly. That evening, a man none of them knew knocked on the ranch door and said he'd been sent by Mr. Blackwell with a message for Miss Mercer. Silas opened the door and looked at the man, who was young, not particularly comfortable, clearly hired for delivery rather than any more threatening purpose. What message? Silas said. He said, the young man glanced past Silas into the house. He said the commission hearing doesn't have to happen. He's prepared to drop all pending claims against properties in this valley if the complaint is withdrawn before Friday. Silas looked at him. All claims, the man said. Every boundary dispute. He'll walk away. Silas stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then Evelyn appeared at his shoulder. She looked at the young man. Tell him no, she said. The young man blinked. Ma'am? Tell Mr. Blackwell that the complaint will not be withdrawn, she said. Tell him the commission hearing will proceed as scheduled. Tell him that if he wants to avoid the criminal referral proceeding at the Attorney General's office, he should discuss that with his lawyer. She paused. And tell him that a man who has done what he has done to the people in this valley doesn't get to walk away because the hearing became inconvenient. She said it without raising her voice. She said it the way she said everything, directly, without theater, with the particular weight of someone who means exactly what they're saying. The young man left. Silas closed the door. Roy, sitting at the kitchen table, said, You know he's going to come harder now. I know, Evelyn said. He offered everything, Silas said. He was not second-guessing her, just processing it. Every claim. He would have walked away. From the land claims, yes, she said. She turned back into the kitchen. Not from what he did to Helen Pedersen and Aldrich Webb and all the others who already lost property. Not from Froke's false surveys that are still sitting in the county record, as if they're legitimate. And not from whatever he does in the next valley with the same methods. She sat down. If I let him walk away, he just moves. And the next set of families they don't have this. She gestured at the file, at the evidence box, at the months of accumulated work on the table. Most people don't. Silas sat down across from her. Roy poured himself coffee, which by now was so habitual he barely registered doing it. All right, Silas said. All right, Roy said. The hearing was set for a Wednesday. On the Monday before it, a 4th letter arrived. This one was not threatening. It was professional. It was from the Territorial Attorney General's office, informing Evelyn Mercer that based on the criminal referral in her complaint, an investigator had been assigned to the case, and that she might be contacted for additional information. The letter addressed her as Ms. Mercer, investigative complainant, which was not a formal title, and the Attorney General's office had almost certainly invented it. But the fact that they had addressed her as something, had given her role a name, was not lost on anyone who read it. Roy read it twice. Investigative complainant, he said. It means they're taking it seriously, Evelyn said. I know what it means, Roy said. He set the letter down. He had a particular expression Silas had come to associate with moments when Roy had something to say and was deciding whether to say it. I want to say something, Roy said. Say it, Evelyn said. When you arrived, Roy said, I thought... He stopped, started again. I thought you were someone who would manage a household and keep this place from falling further behind. That's what I expected. I thought Silas had made a reasonable, practical decision, getting help. He looked at the letter, then at her. That's not what happened. No, she agreed. I don't know how to properly say the rest of it without it sounding... He made a small, frustrated gesture. Roy, she said. It's all right, I know. He nodded. He stood up and put on his hat. Wednesday, he said. I'll be there. You don't have to, she started. I'll be there, he said again, and went out. The night before the hearing, Silas could not sleep. He got up at 2 and went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table in the dark, not lighting the lamp, just sitting. And after 20 minutes, he heard the floor creak on the stairs. She came into the kitchen and sat across from him in the dark, the way they'd sat that first morning, though that first morning felt like something from a different chapter of his life. They didn't speak for a while. Are you afraid? He said. Some, she said. What are you afraid of? He said. He meant specifically. He'd learned to ask her specifically. That I've missed something, she said. That there's a document I didn't find or a connection I didn't make, and Burke walks in tomorrow with something I didn't anticipate, and it unravels. She paused. I've been over it enough times that I can't see it clearly anymore. You read something too many times and you stop being able to tell if it's right. I read it, he said. You read the final version. I read it 3 times, he said. Roy read it twice. Tom Halverson read the summary. Gus Pedersen read the deed analysis section because he wanted to understand his own property history. He looked at her across the dark table. None of us found anything missing. She was quiet. You've built something real, he said. It's not perfect. It is not perfect, she agreed quietly. But it's thorough and it's honest and it connects to the truth, he said. That has to count for something. She looked at him. I want it to count for something, she said. I want the truth to be enough, but I've seen... My father treated families who had the truth on their side and still lost, because the other side had money and patience and no particular relationship with honesty. I know, he said. So I'm afraid, she said. I'm afraid it won't be enough. He sat with that for a moment. What does your father's principle say? He said. What can you do right now? She almost smiled at that. He could see it in the shape of her in the dark. Right now I can't do anything, she said. The work is done. All I can do right now is sleep. Then go to sleep, he said. Are you coming? In a while, he said. She stood up and paused at the doorway. Silas, she said. Yeah. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said. I want you to know what... This has been the most... I haven't felt this way about a place in a very long time. She stopped. About a situation, she corrected herself very quietly. About the work. He looked at her in the dark. I know, he said. He said it the way she sometimes said things to him. Simply, directly, meaning more than the 2 words carried and trusting her to understand the rest. She went upstairs. He sat at the table for another 20 minutes, and then he went up too, and he lay in the dark. And for the first time before something that mattered this much, he was not alone with the weight of it, and the difference that made was not small. The hearing room was fuller than Silas expected. He had thought it would be a small proceeding, a commission panel, attorneys, the named parties, witnesses. What he found when they arrived at the Territorial Commission Hall was something closer to a town meeting. Ranchers from across the valley had come. Some he knew, some he recognized by face without a name. Helen Pedersen was there in her good dress, sitting straight-backed in the 3rd row. Gus was beside her. Frank Delacroix took up most of the bench at the end of the row, and beside him was Aldrich Webb, and beside Webb was Tom Halverson and Clara, who had apparently decided this was exactly the kind of event she came to in her good dress. Old Pete was there. Silas had no idea how he'd gotten there, given that he hadn't left his porch willingly in months. He was sitting near the back with his hat on his knees. Roy was in the second row with his hat in his hands, spine straight, looking like a man who intends to be a fact of the room. Blackwell was already present when they arrived. He sat at the respondents' table with Burke beside him, and another attorney Silas didn't recognize, younger, sharply dressed, imported from somewhere with more courts than Montana. Blackwell himself was a man of about 60, heavy in the way of men who have been comfortable for a long time, with a wide face and the particular expression of someone who has not recently experienced a consequence they didn't choose. He looked at Evelyn when she walked in, not at Silas. At Evelyn. She looked back at him the same way she looked at everything, directly, without flinching, without heat. Just looked, noted, and looked away. The three commission members took their seats at the raised table. The chairman was a gray-haired man named Commissioner Aldrich, who wore his reading glasses on a chain and had the air of a man who had been doing this long enough to have seen most of what people were capable of and was not easily impressed. "This commission is called to order," Aldrich said. "We are here to consider the complaint filed by Miss Evelyn Mercer and Mr. Silas Granger against parties including Territorial Survey Associates, Elias Froke, licensed surveyor, and Victor Blackwell, principal, alleging fraudulent survey conduct, coordinated land claim manipulation, and criminal intimidation." He looked down at his papers. "We have also received a motion to dismiss filed by counsel for Mr. Blackwell, alleging improper document acquisition by the complainant. We will address that motion first." Burke stood. He was smooth. Silas gave him that. He was the kind of attorney who could make something dishonest sound like a procedural concern, and he made the motion to dismiss sound very nearly reasonable, a worry about chain of custody, about the integrity of the record, about whether documents obtained through informal means could be treated as valid evidence. When Burke sat down, Aldrich looked at Evelyn. "Miss Mercer," he said, "you may respond." She stood. "Commissioner Aldrich," she said, "I've provided sworn testimony from Douglas Pratt, the county recorder, including a copy of his authorization ledger showing every document I accessed, the date, and his signature beside each entry. I've also provided sworn statements from 2 independent witnesses who were present on different dates and observed the authorization process directly." She set the 3 statements and the ledger copy on the clerk's table. "Every document in our complaint was properly requested and properly authorized. The motion is without factual basis." Aldrich looked at the documents. He looked at Burke. "Counsel, do you have evidence contradicting the recorder's own ledger?" Burke did not. "Motion denied," Aldrich said. Blackwell, across the room, did not visibly react. Burke made a note on his paper, and then the hearing began in earnest. Evelyn presented the case the way she had built it, methodically, in order, each piece connecting to the next. She walked the commission through 5 years of fraudulent activity with the same quality of attention she brought to everything: thorough, specific, never overstating, never reaching beyond what the document supported. She was not performing outrage. She was not appealing to sympathy. She was building a structure, piece by piece, that could hold weight. Burke objected twice in the first hour. Both objections were overruled. When she reached the section on Elias Froke, she produced the evidence of his financial relationship with Blackwell's associated companies. Pay records she had obtained through a commission subpoena, something Aldrich had granted based on the initial complaint. Records that showed Froke had received payments from 3 different Blackwell-associated entities in the same periods when he'd filed surveys in disputed cases. The room was very quiet. Burke's younger co-counsel leaned over and said something in Burke's ear. Burke's face stayed neutral with visible effort. Then came the witnesses. Helen Pedersen took the chair beside the commission table and spoke in the plain, careful voice of a woman who has spent 60 years saying exactly what she means without decoration. She described the survey stakes appearing on her property. She described the notices. She described the morning a man she didn't know knocked on her door and told her the land her grandfather had homesteaded was no longer within the boundaries her deed described. "What did you do?" Commissioner Aldrich asked her. "I told him to get off my porch," she said. Several people in the gallery made sounds. Aldrich didn't gavel for silence. He appeared to be quietly in sympathy. Then Elias Froke was called. He had been subpoenaed. He arrived with his own attorney, a small man who looked uncomfortable, and he sat in the witness chair with the expression of a man who had been hoping until the last moment that this wouldn't happen. Evelyn stood up. She asked him 12 questions. The first 4 established his credentials and the cases in which he'd submitted surveys. The next 4 established that in each case, the survey supported the claim of the opposing party. The ninth question was, Mr. Froke, did you receive payment from any company associated with Victor Blackwell or his affiliated entities in the 12 months preceding any of the surveys you submitted in these disputes? Froke's attorney leaned over. Froke listened. Then he said, I decline to answer on grounds of potential self-incrimination. The room reacted. Aldrich let it run for a moment before he said, The commission notes the witness's invocation. Burke was writing very fast. The 10th question, is it correct that your standard fee for an independent county survey is $40? Froke's attorney conferred with him. Yes, Froke said carefully. Is it correct that records subpoenaed from the Montana Territorial Bank show deposits to your account of $240 in November of 1888, $300 in March of 1890, and $180 in October of 1891? Froke declined to answer. Those deposits, Evelyn said, correspond precisely to the months in which you filed the 3 surveys that are the foundation of the contested boundary claims in this complaint. She set the bank records on the clerk's table. Burke was on his feet. Objection. The complainant is testifying. I'm presenting documentary evidence, Evelyn said, turning to Aldrich. Commissioner, these are subpoenaed bank records. I am not characterizing them. I am reading their dates and amounts and noting the correspondence to the filing dates in the public record. Sit down, Mr. Burke, Aldrich said. Burke sat down. The 12th question, Evelyn asked quietly, almost gently. Mr. Froke, when you submitted these surveys to the county court as independent expert testimony, did you disclose to the court that you had received payments from any party with an interest in the outcome of those disputes? Silence. Froke looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at the floor. No, Froke said. His voice was the voice of a man watching a structure fall and knowing he built the weak part. I did not. The gallery erupted. Aldrich gavelled for quiet. It took a moment to arrive. Burke attempted a closing argument that lasted 15 minutes and addressed none of the substance of what had just happened, instead focusing on procedural concerns and the unprecedented nature of a complaint filed by a non-attorney in a territorial commission proceeding. It was a closing argument built for a different hearing, in which the preceding 4 hours had not occurred. Aldrich listened to all of it. Then he looked at Evelyn and said, Miss Mercer, does the complainant wish to offer closing remarks? She stood. Commissioner, she said, the commission has now seen 5 years of documented evidence showing that the same surveyor, paid by the same interests, submitted false independent testimony in case after case, allowing fraudulent boundary claims to displace families from land they had legally owned and worked for generations. The families in this room, she did not gesture, but the word room did the work for her, did not lose their land in fair disputes. They lost it because a system was constructed specifically to take it from them. She paused. The commission has the authority to correct that. We're asking you to use it. She sat down. Aldrich looked at his fellow commissioners. A brief, quiet exchange. Then he looked up. The commission will recess to deliberate, he said. We will reconvene within the hour. It was 40 minutes. 40 minutes in which the gallery talked quietly, and Roy sat in the second row with his hands on his knees, and Blackwell sat at his table saying nothing to Burke, and Silas sat beside Evelyn, and at some point, without deciding to, he placed his hand over hers where it rested on the table. She didn't move her hand away. She turned it over, very slightly, so that it was no longer simply hand on top of hand, and that was all, and it was everything, and neither of them said anything about it. When the commission reconvened, Aldrich's face was the face of a man who has reached a conclusion he is entirely certain of. The commission finds the boundary claims submitted in connection with Territorial Survey Associates to be fraudulent in their foundation, he said, as the surveys underpinning those claims were produced by a party with an undisclosed financial relationship to the opposing party in each dispute. All pending claims are hereby permanently dismissed. The Commission is additionally referring the matter of Elias Froke's conduct to the Territorial Licensing Authority for revocation proceedings, and is referring the full criminal matter to the Territorial Attorney General's office with a formal recommendation for prosecution. He set his papers down. The Commission further wishes to note, for the official record, that the quality and thoroughness of the investigative work contained in this complaint is extraordinary. It reflects a level of evidentiary preparation that this commission rarely encounters, even in complaints prepared by licensed legal counsel. He looked at Evelyn over his glasses. Miss Mercer, the commission thanks you for this work. The room did not stay quiet after that. It was not the explosion of a crowd that has been building to celebration. It was something more human than that. The sound of people who have been frightened for a long time and are suddenly, unexpectedly, allowed to stop. Helen Pedersen made a sound that was not quite a sob. Gus put his hand on her shoulder. Frank Delacroix stood up, which given his size was a statement in itself. Tom Halverson leaned over and said something to Clara that made her cover her mouth with her hand. Old Pete, in the back, took off his hat and held it to his chest and said nothing and didn't need to. Roy stood up and he looked at Evelyn across the room, and he nodded once, the specific, economical nod of a man who does not demonstrate things easily and is demonstrating something now. At the respondents' table, Victor Blackwell stood and buttoned his coat. He looked once at Evelyn, directly, with the expression of a man who has lost something and knows it and is not yet ready to feel the full weight of it. And then he turned and walked out, and Burke and the other attorney gathered their papers and followed, and the door swung closed behind them. Silas sat still. The room was moving around him, people standing, talking, embracing, and he was sitting very still at the complainant's table, looking at the grain of the wood, and beside him Evelyn was also still, and his hand was still over hers. He looked at her. She looked back at him. Her eyes were bright, not crying, not quite, but close in the way of someone who has held something very carefully for a very long time, and is now, cautiously, setting it down. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the valley was still cold. The land was still there. The water still ran in the East Branch Creek across 3 properties that had nearly been taken and now would not be. And the spring would come, and the garden layout she'd drawn on paper would become an actual garden. And the steer that had recovered was probably out in the south pasture right now, doing what recovered steers do. And Roy was going to need to talk about reinforcing the barn roof before the deep winter. And there was a window latch upstairs that she'd said she'd fix, and probably had fixed while he wasn't paying attention. All of it was still there. All of it was theirs. I thought about the morning he'd stood at the fence line pretending to dig post holes instead of driving into town. He thought about the letter he'd sent, honest instead of appealing, practical instead of promising, and how he'd almost rewritten it 3 times and sent it as is because he was too tired to pretend. He thought, I wrote the right letter. "Silas," Evelyn said. "Yeah," he said. "You can let go of my hand now," she said. He looked down. He was still holding it. "I could," he said. She looked at him. He didn't let go, and she didn't ask him to again. The drive home from the hearing took longer than usual, not because the road was worse than normal, though the temperature had dropped through the afternoon and the ruts had frozen into ridges that made the wagon shudder on the downhill sections. It took longer because neither of them was in a hurry. Silas drove at an easy pace, and Evelyn sat beside him with the leather satchel empty now on her lap. All the documents had been submitted, received, entered into the official record, and what remained was this: 2 people in a wagon on a Montana road in the early dark of a winter evening, with the particular silence of people who have just been through something together and are still finding the shape of what comes after. Roy had ridden ahead. He'd offered to stay with them, made the offer in Roy's way, practically without sentimentality. And Evelyn had told him to go on home and get some sleep, and Roy had looked at both of them for a moment and said, "All right," and gone. He understood what he was giving them. The stars were beginning to show by the time they reached the creek crossing, and Silas slowed the wagon to a near stop on the near bank the way he always did, let the mare pick her way across. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said. "Yes," he said. "The morning after I arrived," she said, "when we walked the fence line and I said, when I mentioned that the steer was favoring his shoulder, you looked at me a specific way." "I remember," he said. "What were you thinking?" He considered the honest answer, which was complicated, and decided on it anyway because they were past the point of giving each other the simpler version. "I was thinking," he said, "that I had asked for someone practical, and I had apparently received something I didn't have a word for yet." She was quiet for a moment. "And now?" she said. Do you have a word for it? The wagon came up out of the creek crossing, and the wheels found the road again, and the mare shook her head once and settled into her pace. I have several, he said. I'm deciding which one to say first. She looked at him in the dark. Take your time, she said. But she said it differently than the first time she'd said those words to him, weeks ago, standing in a courtroom while he processed a verdict. She said it the way you say something to a person you are not actually in any hurry to be away from. He pulled the wagon into the yard and set the brake and tied the mare, and they went inside, and the house was cold from a day without a fire, and he built it up while she put water on, and by the time the kitchen was warm, they were sitting at the table with their coats still on, because neither of them had gotten around to taking them off yet, and there were 2 cups of coffee between them, and the lamp was burning, and outside the Montana night was doing what it did, cold and dark, and indifferent to everything that had happened today. I want to tell you something, Silas said. She looked at him. When I wrote that letter, he said, the one you said you answered because it was honest, I almost didn't send it. I rewrote it twice. The version I sent was the 3rd version, and I sent it that way because I was too tired to make it sound better than it was. He wrapped his hands around his cup. I didn't think anyone would answer it. I thought, I'll send it, nothing will come of it, and at least I tried. That was as far as my thinking went. And then I answered it, she said. And then you answered it, he said. And I spent the next 2 months telling myself it was practical, that I needed help with the ranch, that this was a sensible arrangement between 2 adults who understood what they were agreeing to. He looked at her. I was still telling myself that the morning you stepped off the stagecoach. She was very still. What happened when I stepped off the stagecoach? She said. You picked up your own suitcase, he said, and you looked at me like you were deciding something, and I thought, this woman is going to change something. I didn't know what. I didn't let myself know what. But you knew, she said. I knew, he said. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. The fire settled in the stove. The mare shifted in the barn and went quiet. Silas, she said. I know I'm not. This isn't easy, he said. He could feel the roughness in his own voice and couldn't quite smooth it. There are days I'm not entirely here. There are mornings I wake up and the first thing I feel is something that doesn't have anything to do with the present, and it takes a while to come back. I'm not uncomplicated. I know that, she said. And you're going to want to do things, he said. The legal training, the work, what you did with this case, you're going to want to keep doing that, and you should. And I don't want you to think, Silas, she said more firmly. He stopped. I grew up on a wagon, she said. I have never in my life had a permanent place to be. I have never had someone waiting when I came home. She paused. I fixed your cabinet. I drew a layout for a kitchen garden. I did those things because I wanted to, because this felt like somewhere I could actually be. She looked at the table, then back at him. I'm not uncomplicated either. I have opinions about most things, and I will share them whether or not you've asked. I don't know how to not notice what's wrong with something. I wake at 4 in the morning, and I will always wake at 4 in the morning, and there is nothing to be done about that. I'm awake at 4 in the morning, he said. I know, she said. That's useful. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, not with any ceremony, just a shift, the way a door that has been slightly ajar swings fully open, not because of any particular force, but because the balance finally tips. I'm asking you to stay, he said. Not because of the arrangement, not because the ranch needs. I'm asking you because I don't want to go back to what this was before you were here, and I don't think that's about the fence repairs or the cattle diagnoses or the 31-page complaint, though all of those are. He stopped. I'm asking because of the mornings, because of the way you said that's not the same thing and were right, because of Kansas. She looked at him for a moment. Kansas, she said. You said you stayed in Kansas for almost a year and you liked waking up in the same room 2 mornings in a row, he said. I want to be the place you wake up in the same room. It was not a polished thing to say. He knew it wasn't. He was not a man who had spent 4 years practicing declarations, and it showed. She looked at him with the expression he'd spent 10 weeks learning to read, that particular quality of open attention that she turned on things she was taking seriously, not deciding whether to trust him. She'd decided that some time ago, he thought, just taking it in, making room for it. Yes, she said. Simple, direct, the way she said everything. Yes, he said back, just to hear it twice. She picked up her coffee cup and drank from it, and he did the same, and they sat in the warm kitchen in the ordinary way they had sat in it dozens of times now. And it was the same as all those times and entirely different, and neither of them tried to make it larger than it was. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The weeks that followed were not perfect. Silas could have told anyone asking that they would not be perfect, and Evelyn would have said the same thing in fewer words. The criminal proceedings against Blackwell moved slowly, the way territorial legal matters did, with the grinding, impersonal patience of a system that was built to outlast any individual's urgency. The Attorney General's office sent letters. Elias Froke's surveying license was suspended within 3 weeks of the hearing, which was faster than anyone expected. Victor Blackwell retained new attorneys, better ones than Burke, imported from the East, and the criminal case became a complicated affair that would take the better part of the following year to resolve. During that year, Blackwell was not entirely quiet. He did not send more letters, and he did not cut more fences, but those methods had become part of the documented case against him, and using them again would have been genuinely stupid, and whatever Blackwell was, he was not genuinely stupid. What he did instead was hire a journalist from the Territorial Gazette to write a piece questioning the qualifications of the woman who had filed the commission complaint. The piece appeared in February. It referred to Evelyn 3 times as the rancher's companion and questioned whether a woman without formal legal training was a reliable source of the interpretations presented at the hearing. Silas read it at breakfast and set it down and looked at Evelyn. "I've been called worse," she said, without looking up from her own reading. "The commission chairman called your work extraordinary," he said. "I know what he called it," she said, "and so does anyone who read the official record." She turned a page. "This is Blackwell trying to change the story. He can't change the documents." She was right. She was, as had become something of a pattern, right. The Gazette received 14 letters in response to the article, 12 of which were from Valley residents who had been present at the hearing or had direct knowledge of the investigation. Douglas Pratt wrote one, which was the most efficient 2 paragraphs Silas had ever read. Helen Pedersen wrote one, which was considerably longer and considerably more pointed. The Gazette published them all, because even a territorial gazette understands when the wind is running against you. The journalist did not write about Evelyn again. In March, Aldrich Webb received official confirmation that the fraudulent transfer of his south parcel, the land he'd lost 3 years earlier through one of Burke's manipulated disputes, was being reviewed for reversal. The commission had identified it as a direct product of Froke's false survey work. Webb rode to the Granger Ranch on a cold Tuesday morning to tell Evelyn himself, which told you something about what the Valley thought of where the credit belonged. He sat at the kitchen table, Webb, who was not a small man and who made chairs look provisional, and he held his hat in his hands and said, "I didn't think I'd ever see that land again." "You haven't seen it yet," Evelyn said. "The reversal process will take time." "I know," he said, "but it's moving." He looked at her. "My wife's family worked that ground, 3 generations, and I let it go because I didn't know how to fight what they were doing." He paused. "You did." Evelyn set down her pen. "You testified," she said. "You let me copy your records. You documented your losses and sat in that hearing room, and you let the commission see what happened to a real family on real land. That's not nothing, Aldrich. That's most of it." Webb was quiet for a moment. "My wife wants to have you both to supper," he said, "when this is done, properly done." "We'll be there," Silas said. After Webb left, Evelyn sat at the table for a while without picking her pen back up. Silas watched her from the doorway. She didn't know he was there, and he saw something on her face that she didn't often let show. Not pride exactly. Something more tired than pride, and more real. The look of a person who has carried something heavy and set it down and is surprised to find that the relief doesn't feel the way they expected it to. That it feels more like grief than triumph because the carrying is over, and the carrying, in its way, had been what she was. "Hey," he said. She looked up. "Come outside," he said. "It's cold," she said. "I know," he said. "Come outside anyway." She came outside. They stood on the porch. The wraparound porch that Margaret's father had insisted on building wide enough to be useful, which it was in summer and symbolic in winter. And the air was cold and the sky was the particular blue of a March afternoon that has more winter in it than spring, but is trying, and the land lay around them flat and frozen and entirely theirs. "What are we doing out here?" she said. "I wanted you to see it," he said. She looked at him. "You fixed this ranch," he said. "I want you to look at it." "We fixed it," she said. "Before you get to argue with me about that," he said, "look at it first." She looked. She looked at the fences that were straight, at the barn roof that held, at the south pasture where the cattle were moving slowly in the afternoon cold, at the garden plot under the snow. That would be her kitchen garden when the ground thawed. At all of it. The ordinary working evidence of a ranch that was being maintained by people who were paying attention. "The gatepost on the east side still needs work," she said. "I know," he said. "The east fence line." "I know," he said. "Look at the rest of it." She was quiet for a moment. "It's a good ranch," she said. She had said it the first day. She meant it the same way now and differently. "It's ours," he said. She looked at him. He wasn't looking at the ranch anymore. She held his gaze for a moment, and then she did something she almost never did. She leaned into him. Not a dramatic thing, not a collapse, just a slight shift of her weight in his direction, her shoulder against his arm, and he put his arm around her, and they stood on the porch in the cold and looked at the land together. Neither of them said anything for a while. "I want to pursue the legal training formally," she said eventually. "I know," he said. "There's a territorial law office in Helena that's been mentioned in connection with the commission. I've written to ask whether they accept, whether there's a path to formal qualification that doesn't require—" "Evelyn," he said. "What?" "I know," he said. "I've known you were going to do this since the day you walked out of the recorder's office with 8 pages of copies and explained what a cross-referenced filing number was." He paused. "I want you to do it. Whatever it takes to get the training, we'll manage it." She was quiet. "It may mean time away," she said, "periodically, if the training requires travel. Roy manages the ranch when I'm away," he said. "He'll manage it when you're away. That's what Roy is for." "Roy would not appreciate being described as something someone is for," she said. "Roy would agree with me and refuse to admit it," he said. Something in her relaxed further, very slightly, the way something does when a weight it has been braced against is removed. "I want to keep taking cases," she said. "Families like the Webbs, people who have land being taken through methods they don't know how to fight." "Good," he said. "It may be complicated," she said. "There will be people who object to, There are always people who object," he said. "You know how to build a case against people who object. I've seen you do it. It takes about 6 weeks and 31 pages. She made a sound. It was a laugh, a real one, brief and unguarded, the kind that escapes before a person decides to let it out. He had been collecting those. He had, he realized, been collecting all of it. The almost smiles, the dry observations, the 4 a.m. silences, the way she said his name when she was about to tell him something true. He was not a man who was good at knowing what he had until he'd had it a while. That was a flaw he was aware of and working on. They married in May. Not at the courthouse, not at the church in town. At the ranch, on the grass beside the barn, which was only halfway elegant and nobody pretended otherwise. Clara Halverson brought food enough for twice the number of people present, which was her way of managing anxiety and also her way of making sure nobody left hungry. Roy wore a clean shirt that Silas had never seen before and refused to comment on it. Old Pete came and sat in a chair someone brought out from the house and stayed the whole afternoon, and Silas found him at one point standing at the east fence line, apparently inspecting the post he'd mentioned needed work. "It still needs work," Pete said. "I know, Pete," Silas said. "Getting around to it," Pete said. "Getting married today, Pete," Silas said. Pete looked at the post. "After then," he said, and went back to his chair. Helen Pedersen stood beside Gus through the ceremony and cried quietly, which she would have denied if asked, and which everyone pretended not to notice. Aldrich Webb and his wife came and stood in the back, and Webb's wife, a small woman named Dora, who had spent 3 years grieving a piece of land her grandparents had worked, looked at Evelyn before the ceremony started and held her hand for a moment without saying anything, which was the kind of thing that doesn't need words. There was no minister available on short notice, which was fine because neither of them had insisted on one. The county justice of the peace drove out from Red Bluff and performed the legal portion in about 4 minutes, which was exactly as long as it needed to be, and then Frank Delacroix, who had not been asked to say anything and did it anyway because that was Frank, said in his large plain voice, "This is a good day," and everyone agreed with him, which was more than sufficient. Afterward, when most people had gone and the food was mostly gone, and Roy was stacking chairs with the quiet efficiency of a man who considers cleaning up after events part of his responsibilities, Silas stood at the edge of the yard in the early evening and watched the light go out of the sky the way it does in Montana in May. Slowly, in layers, the orange going to pink, going to the particular violet that has no name, but that anyone who has lived in this country knows from the inside. Evelyn came to stand beside him. She was still wearing the dress she'd worn for the ceremony. Not fancy, not plain, somewhere in between, a pale gray that had looked nothing like a wedding dress and entirely like her. She'd let her hair down finally at some point in the afternoon, and it was loose now in the early evening air. "Pete's right about the fence post," she said. "I'll get to it," he said. "Tomorrow?" "Probably Thursday," he said. "I could do it Wednesday," she said. He looked at her. "I know how to set a post," she said. "I know you do," he said. He was not surprised. He had stopped being surprised by what she knew how to do, which he thought was probably a sign of something, of really seeing a person, of being past the phase where they're still revealing themselves, and into the longer phase where you're simply together in the accumulated reality of who they are. "Wednesday, then," he said. She nodded. She looked out at the land. "I got a letter back from the law office in Helena," she said. He looked at her. "They're willing to discuss an arrangement," she said. "Not formal apprenticeship. They don't do that for women yet, officially. But they have a senior attorney who said, and I'm quoting approximately, that based on the commission complaint documentation he'd reviewed in the course of the Blackwell referral, he would be willing to provide structured mentorship." She paused. "Which is apprenticeship with a different word." "When do you start?" he said. "I haven't said yes yet." "Evelyn," he said. She looked at him. "When do you start?" he said again. She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her face did the thing it sometimes did, opened, very slightly, in the place where she kept the things she didn't often show. "He said September would suit him," she said. "Then September," he said. She looked out at the land again, at the fences that were mostly straight, at the barn roof that held, at the south pasture in the last of the light, where the cattle were settling for the night, at all of it, and he watched her look at it and thought about the woman who had stepped off a stagecoach with one suitcase and noticed a leaning fence post before she'd been on the property 10 minutes. He thought about grief and about the specific way grief teaches you to hold things loosely because you've learned the hard way that nothing is guaranteed, and how that lesson, which felt like wisdom for a long time, had quietly become an excuse, a reason not to reach, a way of calling isolation by a better name and believing it. He thought about the letter he'd written on a cold night in February because he was too tired to be anything other than honest about what he was and what he needed. The letter that should have sounded like defeat, and somehow, to the right person, had sounded like the truth. You can build walls around everything that matters to you and call it protecting yourself, and you will be protected, and you will also be alone, and those two things will not cancel each other out no matter how long you wait. He had learned that. It had taken years and a grief that reshaped him, and one honest letter, and a woman who picked up her own suitcase. Victor Blackwell was formally charged in August. The criminal proceedings took the better part of another year, during which time he did not operate in the territory and could not have even had he wanted to. When the case concluded, 2 of his companies were dissolved by court order. He paid restitution to several families, including Aldrich Webb, and the amount was significant enough to represent something real. He did not go to prison, which was the part of justice that remained imperfect. And Evelyn said so plainly when the verdict came through, and Roy said money buys better outcomes than the law would like to admit. And that was true, and nobody pretended otherwise. But Elias Froke lost his license permanently. Colton Burke was disbarred. The county judge who had signed off on 2 of the fraudulent transfers resigned before an inquiry could be completed, which the Valley chose to view as its own form of consequence. The Land Commission ruling stood. Every contested boundary claim was dismissed. Helen Pedersen's south parcel, Webb's land, 2 other properties that had been in quiet dispute. The commission's decision gave them ground to stand on that Burke's system had been designed to take away. None of it was clean. None of it was the uncomplicated satisfaction that justice looks like in theory. Some of the loss stayed lost. Some of the years spent fighting were years that couldn't be given back. Dora Webb got her husband's family land returned on paper, but the 3 years she'd spent grieving it were still 3 years. Evelyn understood this without needing to have it explained to her. She understood it the way people understand things they have thought about carefully and honestly, and without the comfort of pretending that full resolution is the same as justice. What she believed, and she said this once to Silas on a winter evening when they were talking about the Froke verdict and what it meant, was that the point was never to undo the damage. The damage was done. The point was to stop the machinery. If we stopped him here, she said, and the next valley doesn't get what this valley got, if the families there still have their land 10 years from now because this case exists on record, because Froke's conduct is documented, because there is now a precedent for what a commission complaint can do, that's what it was for. She paused. Not punishment, prevention. Silas looked at her. You're already thinking about the next case, he said. I'm already thinking about 3, she said. He shook his head slowly. The fence post, he said. She looked at him. Wednesday, he said. I'll do it Wednesday. You are not going to fix my fence post on the first day of our marriage and then spend the rest of our lives solving other people's problems. It's Thursday now, she said. Wednesday was 4 months ago. Then I'm very behind, he said. I'll get to it. She looked at him with that particular expression, the one he had watched develop over months, the one that had started as careful assessment and become something warmer and more complicated than that, the one that was, he had decided, the closest thing to a gift he had ever been given that he hadn't earned and couldn't have planned for. Thursday, she said. Do it Thursday. Thursday, he agreed. He did it Thursday. She helped because she knew how to set a post, and there was no reason not to use that knowledge, and because that was who they were, 2 people who did the work in front of them together and then came inside and had coffee and argued mildly about the best approach to the spring planting. And neither of them was right entirely, and both of them were right somewhat, and that was marriage, actual marriage, not the arrangement, but the real thing. Years afterward, when people in the valley talked about what had happened, and they did talk about it, because the valley had a long memory for the things that had almost been taken from it, they remembered it in different ways depending on who you asked. The older ranchers remembered the hearing, the commission ruling, the look on Burke's face when Froke declined to answer, and the room understood what that meant. The women in the valley, Clara Halverson, Dora Webb, Helen Pedersen, and a generation of daughters who came after them, remembered something different. They remembered that a woman had walked into a county recorder's office and asked for documents, and waited for permission, and copied what she was given, and turned it into something that mattered. That the tool she'd used was attention, that the weapon she'd carried was a notebook, and the willingness to believe that what was true could be made visible if you worked carefully enough and long enough and weren't afraid of the work. They remembered that she had arrived in this valley with 1 suitcase and no particular plan beyond answering an honest letter, and that she had looked at what was broken, in the fences, in the law, in a man who had forgotten how to be fully alive, and she had not looked away from any of it. What Silas remembered, when he was honest with himself about it, was the morning at the kitchen table, 5:15, before any of it, before the stakes and the complaint and the hearing and the verdict. Just 2 people who had both lost something essential and were sitting in the dark with coffee, and the way she'd asked him if he found his way through the winters, and the way he'd said, I get through them, and the way she'd looked at him and said, that's not the same thing. She had been right. She was right about most things, and he had long since stopped being surprised by it. And he loved her for it in the specific way you love someone not for their best qualities in isolation, but for the way all of their qualities fit together into a person you want to be in the same room with for the rest of your life. He was not always easy to live with. He still woke some mornings with the weight of the old grief, and it still took time to come back from it, and there were days he was quieter than was useful and needed her to say his name sharply to bring him back to the present, and she did, without drama, because that was who she was. She was not always easy to live with either. She had opinions about most things and shared them whether or not she'd been asked, and she noticed what was wrong with everything, including him, and there was no such thing as a problem in her vicinity that she wasn't already 3 steps into solving before you'd finished describing it, which was occasionally exhausting even when it was entirely useful. They were not a perfect pair. They were a real one, which is harder to achieve and worth considerably more. The ranch gave them a life. The work gave them purpose. The valley gave them neighbors who had been through something with them and carried that knowledge in the specific way people carry things they survive together. And on Thursday mornings, when the weather was right and the work allowed it, they still sometimes sat on the porch, the wide porch Margaret's father had built, and looked at the land in the early light, and Evelyn drank her coffee and pointed out whatever needed attention, and Silas said he'd get to it, and sometimes he did, and sometimes it took longer than he said, and neither of them was keeping score. That was the ranch. That was the life. That was what an honest letter, sent in the middle of February by a man too tired to pretend, had made possible. It turned out that was enough to build